Hey guys, tonight we slip off our modern shoes and step softly onto the warm sands of Meroe, the ancient city of queens, where the air hums with crickets and the stone pyramids glow like embers under the moonlight. You can almost hear the Nile whispering somewhere beyond the dark dunes, and the rustle of palm fronds against mud brick walls. There's a strange comfort in the thought that everyone here has gone to bed. Their troubles paused until the sun decides to come back. The guards on the city gates are half asleep, leaning on their spears, and you're fairly sure one of them is humming about bread. You probably wouldn't survive this world for more than an afternoon. Between the climate, the etiquette, and the sudden chariot traffic, but for tonight, you don't have to. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge slowly up the packed earth road that leads into the royal city. The night air is heavy but not unpleasant, the kind of heat that wraps around your shoulders like a lazy blanket. Moonlight catches on the plastered walls of merchant villas, glinting off embedded shards of crushed quartz. Dogs bark once and think better of it. A camel snorts from somewhere, the kind of abrupt sound that makes you briefly reconsider your entire life plan. Here in Meroe, the capital of Kush, time moves like syrup. The Kandake, the queens, have ruled from here for centuries, their power so absolute that Roman generals once thought twice about even writing them angry letters. Historians still argue whether their title meant Queen Regnant or Queen Mother, or possibly a mix of both, like a 2-for-1 sale on regal authority. You're not sure which version you like better, but tonight you've been invited to see their world from the inside. The city itself breathes gently around you. It isn't quite asleep. A few oil lamps glow in the arched windows of the outer houses. You pass a bakery, its clay oven still warm, and the sweet smell of millet bread rolls out like a sigh. Someone has painted a stylized lion over the doorway, the paint flaking but proud. A sleepy cat sprawls in the street, paw flicking at an invisible enemy. Past the villas, the walls of the palace loom taller, smooth sandstone glowing pale in the moon. The outer gates are framed by colossal ram-headed statues, their faces worn soft by centuries of wind. A lone guard in linen robes and a bronze chest plate gives you a bored nod. He looks as if he's about one lullaby away from keeling over. His helmet is slightly too big for him, and it wobbles when he moves. You try not to stare. Inside the gates, the silence deepens. The palace courtyard stretches wide and still, paved in blocks of stone that are cool under your bare feet. Palm trees sway gently, their fronds casting long striped shadows across the walls. You think you hear water trickling, faint and secretive from a fountain hidden among the greenery. The air smells faintly of myrrh and dust, like someone opened an old jewelry box. You pause to breathe it in, the sheer weight of history pressing down in the gentlest way possible, like a cat settling on your chest. These stones have known the footsteps of queens, generals, priests, and the occasional frantic pigeon. Some say the queens of Meroe kept secret passageways beneath this courtyard, built centuries earlier by kings trying to escape awkward dinner parties. Historians still argue whether those tunnels actually existed, or whether they were just very elaborate wine cellars with trust issues. A flicker of movement draws your eye. On the far side of the courtyard, a scribe shuffles by carrying a bundle of papyrus, muttering about ink recipes like a man scolding the gods. He nearly walks into a column, recovers and continues as though nothing has happened. A servant glides past with a tray of lotus blossoms, humming so softly it's almost not there. You have the odd feeling you've stumbled into a dream someone forgot to end. Beyond the courtyard, the royal quarters rise in terraces and colonnades. Their doorways are framed with carved lotus capitals, and their walls are painted in ochre and deep blue that has somehow outlasted entire empires. You pass a mural showing a queen smiting her enemies with the casual grace of someone watering plants. Her eyes are enormous, outlined in black coal. She looks like she knows exactly how long your attention span is. There's a stillness here that isn't empty. It's waiting. The rooms seem to hold their breath as you walk past. Curtains stir though there's no breeze. You half expect the walls to whisper. Instead, you hear only the sound of your own steps and the distant thump of a drum from somewhere deeper in the city. The rhythm is slow like a heartbeat, like the city itself is asleep but dreaming. A set of wide stairs leads up to the main audience hall. The steps are shallow, built for processions rather than haste. You climb them slowly, feeling the smooth stone under your palms as you steady yourself. At the top, bronze torch bowls stand cold and unlit, their ashes soft and grey. In the daylight, this place would blaze with banners and fanfares. Tonight it belongs to the moon, and the moon does not care about protocol. At the final landing, you stop. The doorway ahead is framed by two granite lions, their paws resting on carved spheres, their faces worn to soft smiles. Between them stretches a heavy cedar door inlaid with hammered copper stars. One is slightly crooked, and you find that oddly comforting. Even here, even in this place of near mythic power, someone probably muttered good enough after hammering the last nail. You place a hand on the cool copper. The door does not move, not yet. This is just the threshold, the pause before the waking world and the dreams start to blur. Behind this door, the life of a queen waits. Incense, council chambers, tame elephants, and arguments over who left the honey jar open. For now you stand still under the silent moon of Meroia, and the air hums softly around you like a lullaby. The first light of dawn stretches across the palace courtyard like spilled honey, catching on the mosaic tiles and waking up everything that pretended to be asleep. You blink at how quietly the whole place shifts from moonlit stillness to yawning activity. Somewhere overhead, an ibis squawks, as if startled by its own shadow. You're standing near the edge of the courtyard, and the stone beneath your feet is still cool from the night. In an hour it will be hot enough to fry an egg. Though knowing palace rules, you're pretty sure someone would make you fill out a papyrus form first. Servants glide through the open colonnades, barefoot and brisk, carrying bundles of linen, reed brooms, and the occasional very confused chicken. You catch the smell of damp earth as one of them sprinkles water over the tiles to settle the dust. It makes the courtyard gleam like polished bronze. Historians still argue whether this daily sprinkling was mostly for cleanliness or just an excuse to create dramatic reflections of the palace walls. Either way, it works. A cat stretches luxuriously on the sun-warmed edge of a step, yawns so hard you think it might turn inside out, then promptly falls back asleep. Its fur is the color of burnt honey, the same shade as the sandstone pillars surrounding the courtyard. One of the gardeners walks by carrying a basket of blue lotus blossoms. He pauses to scold the cat, who ignores him with regal efficiency. A masterclass in court politics, if you think about it. The palace itself seems to wake in layers. First the birds darting and shrill, then the sound of cloth being beaten against a stone washing slab somewhere beyond the walls. Then voices, low and careful, weaving together in the language of palace servants, a blend of greetings, warnings, and the eternal question of where someone left the oil lamps. At the far end of the courtyard, a pair of attendants roll open the great bronze-banded doors to let in the morning breeze. The air carries faint traces of the nearby river, silt, fish, and the sharp green scent of papyrus reeds. It's a smell that makes you want to walk slower, as if hurrying might scare it away. You wonder if the queens ever noticed it, or if they were too busy being busy, wrapped in layers of power and gold jewelry. In the center of the courtyard stands a carved stone basin, wide and shallow, filled with water so still it looks like black glass. A single white lotus floats on its surface. Servants kneel to skim away any drifting dust, their hands barely disturbing the water. This is where visiting dignitaries are supposed to pause and see their reflections before stepping into the audience halls. The symbolism is obvious. Come see yourself clearly before you dare speak to the Queen. It's elegant and also a little intimidating, like having to compliment your boss's cat before asking for a raise. On the north side of the courtyard, the colonnade gives way to an open-air veranda lined with painted columns. Their capitals are carved into palm fronds, and the paint is held remarkably well, bright emerald and lapis blue. One column still bears a faint graffiti doodle of what appears to be a stick-figure camel. You try not to laugh out loud. Historians still argue whether such casual doodles were the work of bored guards or young apprentices trying to master their chisels. But either way, the ancient equivalent of "I was here" is alive and well. As you drift through the courtyard, you notice the rhythm of the place settling in around you. The bustling servants never collide. Each seems to know precisely when to veer, pivot, or pause to let another pass. They move like starlings in flight, coordinated by some invisible instinct born of repetition. This entire space, once intimidating in its silence, now feels like the slow heartbeat of the palace itself. A bell chimes softly from somewhere deep inside, a single tone that seems to hang in the air. At once, the activity in the courtyard subtly shifts. The chicken disappears, spirited away by someone with stealth worthy of a spy. The gardeners retreat toward the inner halls. Their cat, somehow sensing this is the moment, slinks off with the lazy dignity of someone who knows they own the place. From the southern archway, a small procession appears. These are the morning chamberlains, their linen robes freshly starched, and their expressions already halfway between serene and exasperated. One carries a bundle of palm leaf fans. Another balances a lacquered box filled with gold pins that sparkle like trapped sunbeams. They walk at a measured pace, their sandals whispering against the stone, heading toward the Queen's private chambers. You can picture her inside, still somewhere between dreaming and duty. Soon she'll step barefoot onto the same stone you're standing on, the courtyard bowing invisibly beneath her presence. For now, though, you get to watch this delicate moment. The palace inhaling, the day assembling itself like an elaborate costume. The sky shifts from pale lavender to molten peach. Sunlight floods the courtyard, chasing away the last cool shadows clinging to the steps. The painted murals along the colonnade seem to brighten before your eyes. One shows a scene of the Nile, boats with billowing sails and piles of tribute, ivory, leopard skins, jars of honey, and one particularly disgruntled-looking giraffe. Another depicts the Kandake raising her hands as captives kneel before her, while attendants fan her with ostrich plumes, roughly the size of beach umbrellas. The artist gave her eyes that seem to follow you around the courtyard, which is a little unsettling this early in the morning. The chamberlains pass by you without a word, their gazes fixed straight ahead. One of them smells faintly of cinnamon, and another hums under his breath like someone practicing courage. They vanish through an archway draped in linen curtains that glow like lanterns in the morning sun. And just like that, the courtyard exhales. The commotion ebbs again, leaving behind only the buzz of cicadas in the garden and the gentle burble of the hidden fountain. You feel as though you've stumbled into the palace's secret rhythm. Wake, gather, vanish, repeat. Somewhere beyond those curtains the queen is stirring, and soon she will emerge like the sun over the desert. You lean back against the sun-warmed stone wall, listening as the soft breeze rattles the palm fronds overhead. A lone feather drifts lazily past your face. The palace courtyard is awake now, and so somehow are you. The linen curtains part, and the hush that follows is almost physical, like the air itself is holding its breath. From the archway steps a cluster of attendants moving in slow synchronization, their white linen robes crisp as folded parchment, their feet soundless against the polished stone. In their hands they carry copper basins of steaming water, folded towels and bundles of fresh-cut lotus blossoms. Behind them drifts the faint resinous sweetness of frankincense, curling in pale ribbons that catch in the morning light. They glide toward the queen's private bathing chambers, and you trail after them, quiet as your curiosity will let you. This is the first stop in the daily ritual of the Kandake, the moment when power is still tangled with sleep, when a queen is just a person, gently returning to herself. The bathing room is carved from cool sandstone, its walls lined with smooth alabaster tiles that seem to glow softly from within. A sunbeam slants through a high lattice window, slicing the rising steam into golden rays. The air is warm and wet, and smells faintly of honey and crushed herbs. You catch a glimpse of attendants setting polished stones around the rim of a sunken pool, each stone engraved with protective symbols. Historians still argue whether these glyphs were meant as spiritual wards or simply as elaborate interior decor, though given the palace's flair for drama, you suspect a bit of both. At the pool's edge, a pair of musicians kneel with small harps shaped like birds. Their strings hum softly as they pluck a slow, rippling melody that sounds halfway between a lullaby and the sound of water itself thinking. The rhythm makes your shoulders sag. You imagine if you sat down right here, you'd dissolve like sugar in tea. The queen herself enters wrapped in a robe of sheer linen, her hair hidden beneath a silk scarf embroidered with gold thread. She doesn't look at anyone as she walks, not out of arrogance, but because she doesn't have to. The room tilts around her like sunflowers following the sun. There's something quietly unstoppable about her, the way a river is unstoppable, never hurrying, never asking permission, and yet somehow arriving everywhere. She steps into the water with the care of someone placing a crown back in its box. The surface ripples outward, distorting her reflection into soft crescents of gold and bronze. Attendants pour warm water over her shoulders from copper ewers shaped like ducks, steam rising in little sighs. One kneels to anoint her wrists with scented oil from a tiny alabaster jar. The fragrance drifts toward you, cinnamon, myrrh, and something sharp and green like crushed citrus leaves. It smells like wealth and thunder having tea together. You notice her jewelry has been set aside on a carved cedar tray, layered gold collars, broad as your hand, delicate bangles shaped like coiled cobras, rings inset with tiny lapis scarabs. They glitter softly in the damp light, looking almost alive. A single fly lands on one, and then immediately thinks better of it, as though aware it has trespassed onto divine property. The attendants wash her hair with a paste of ground lotus petals and scented oil, combing it gently with ivory pins. The paste clings to their fingers like sunlit mud, and you watch it swirl away in pale clouds as they rinse it into the water. Historians still argue whether these elaborate hair rituals were strictly hygienic or meant to signal divine favor, though judging by the Queen's serene expression, they might also just feel really, really nice. When the washing is done, they lift her from the pool with a towel so soft it might actually be woven from gossip. She stands still while they pat her dry, arms held slightly out like a statue. One of them sneezes delicately into her elbow and looks like she might burst into tears, but the queen doesn't even blink. You wonder how many years of training it takes to stay this calm while being towel-dried in front of an audience. Next comes the dressing. They begin with a shift of the thinnest linen you've ever seen, light as breath, whispering as it slides over her skin. Over that goes a pleated dress dyed the deep red of pomegranate skins. It clings in neat vertical folds, held in place by a broad girdle of hammered gold. Then layers of adornment, the wide collar. Its hundreds of tiny faience beads clicking softly like rain on leaves, cuffs of electrum chased with tiny hieroglyphs, and a towering headdress shaped like a double uraeus, the twin cobras rearing back as though ready to hiss at anyone thinking impolite thoughts. One attendant kneels to paint her eyelids with crushed malachite, the green vivid and cool against her dark skin. Another outlines her eyes in black coal so perfectly you suspect she could win a staring contest with the sun. When they're done, she glances briefly into a polished bronze mirror, and you swear the mirror glances back. All the while, the musicians keep playing their slow water song, and the incense coils upward in lazy spirals. You feel your own body sinking with the rhythm, as though your heartbeat has been wrapped in silk. It's easy to see how this ritual isn't just about cleanliness or fashion. It's about remembering. Each layer of scent and color and texture is like a bead on a rosary. Each gesture reminding her and everyone watching that she is more than mortal, that she is the living hinge between gods and people. As the final touch, an attendant places a single fresh lotus blossom behind her ear. It trembles faintly, as though nervous about the honor. The queen rises from her stool, her linen dress whispering around her ankles. She says nothing. She doesn't need to. When she glides out of the chamber, the air seems to go with her. The attendants bow low until she vanishes through the door, leaving behind only the scent of myrrh and the faint, cooling hiss of the bath water. You let out a breath you didn't know you'd been holding. That was just the morning routine, just the warm-up. Somewhere beyond these alabaster walls, the machinery of rule is already whirring awake, and soon she will step straight into its center. You wonder if she ever misses the quiet, if she dreams about slipping out of the palace barefoot and anonymous, just another sleepy figure in the dawn-lit market. Then you imagine her laughing at the thought. Queens don't wander off. Queens rise, gilded and perfumed, and walk into the day as though the day itself has been rehearsing for her arrival. You follow the faint rustle of linen and the soft jingle of gold as the Kandake moves through the palace corridors toward the council chamber. The air here is cooler, the walls thick enough to hush the outside world into a muffled hum. Long strips of woven reed mats soften her footsteps, though honestly, even if she walked in tap shoes, everyone would probably still pretend they heard nothing but destiny approaching. Sunlight pours in thin blades through high slits in the stone, catching the drifting dust motes so they look like little stars trying to sneak in. You trail behind her at a respectful distance, close enough to watch, far enough not to be vaporized by a stern glance. The council chamber opens suddenly before you, a vast hall with a domed ceiling painted deep blue and flecked with golden stars. A faint draught stirs the hanging linen banners, each dyed with the crimson sun disk symbol of Kush. The room smells faintly of old cedar and slightly newer arguments. At the center stands a low, broad throne carved from dark granite, its armrests shaped like lions with expressions that could best be described as eternal judgment with a side of mild disappointment. The throne is raised on a dais just high, enough to force anyone speaking to look up slightly, which is the architectural equivalent of a mic drop. Around the dais, half a dozen counselors kneel on reed mats. Their robes are impeccable, their faces composed and their eyes just a little too alert, like deer who've learned to play chess. One carries a bundle of papyrus scrolls, another a string of carved ivory counters used for tallying grain shipments. Each bows so low you're briefly concerned someone will get stuck that way. The queen takes her place on the granite throne with the practiced grace of someone who has sat on more thrones than chairs. The chamber settles into silence as clean and sharp as a blade edge. A scribe kneels at her side with a polished wooden writing board balanced on his lap, ready to immortalize whatever decisions are about to ruin or rescue someone's week. The first to speak is the treasurer, a lean man with the anxious energy of someone who's been doing math since before sunrise. He murmurs about caravans arriving from the south, their camels loaded with gold dust, ivory tusks, and something described only as mystery birds. You try not to picture flamingos wearing tiny veils. Historians still argue whether these southern caravans truly came from the legendary land of Punt or from closer Nubian settlements. The treasurer seems to prefer not arguing at all, just quietly sweating into his collar. Next comes the high priestess, her voice low and smooth as river clay. She reports on the temple rituals, noting with mild concern that the sacred crocodile statue has developed a suspicious crack in its tail. This sparks a brief debate about whether it's an omen or just the result of last week's over-enthusiastic polishing. The queen listens, face utterly still, though you catch the faintest twitch at the corner of her mouth, like she might be suppressing a laugh or a sneeze. The commander of the guard steps forward last, a broad-shouldered woman with a scar across her jaw that looks suspiciously like it might have an interesting backstory. She delivers a short report about the border forts. No major threats, but one patrol camel has developed opinions. The word hangs in the air like a soap bubble. No one dares ask for clarification. Throughout it all, the queen says almost nothing. She tilts her head occasionally, the gold cobras on her crown glinting like twin lightning bolts. When she finally speaks, her voice is soft and low, the kind of sound that makes everyone lean forward without realizing it. She asks 3 questions, precise, surgical, and so quietly devastating that 2 counselors visibly rethink their entire careers in real time. Then, with the air of someone choosing between tea blends, she gives her verdicts. Send fresh supplies to the southern forts. Commission a new crocodile statue, with slightly less smirking, she adds dryly. And increase caravan escorts to avoid unexpected bird-related incidents. The scribe scratches furiously to keep up, his reed pen squeaking like a panicked mouse. There's a rhythm to the whole meeting that surprises you. It isn't fiery debate or grand pronouncements. It's quiet, measured, like watching someone braid silk. Slow loops, gentle tension, never a tangle. You realize this might be the real core of her power. Not the jewelry, not even the throne, but this ability to sit in the still center while everything else spins around her. One counselor timidly suggests raising the grain tax on the outlying villages. The queen arches one eyebrow just slightly, and the suggestion collapses under its own despair. Even the lion armrests look unimpressed. The counselor quickly remembers an urgent appointment with silence and retreats into it. By the time the meeting winds down, the sunlight has shifted to a warm amber, striping the chamber floor like tiger shadows. The treasurer gathers his scrolls with the air of someone grateful to still exist. The high priestess murmurs a blessing under her breath that might also be an apology to the cracked crocodile. The commander salutes, which somehow makes her scar wink. The queen stands slow and fluid, as if gravity works on her schedule alone. The scribe exhales so hard he almost falls over. Attendants sweep in silently to roll up the reed mats and collect any lingering dignity left on the floor. As the councillors file out, the queen pauses at the threshold. For a moment the sun hits her crown just right, and the twin cobras flare like living fire. Then she turns away, leaving behind only the faint jingle of gold and the echo of a room rearranging itself back into calm. You linger a moment longer, gazing at the throne now sitting empty on its dais. Without her in it, it looks oddly smaller, like a costume on a hanger. The lions on its arms seem to sag just slightly, as though they miss the weight of her already, and then, almost as quietly as you entered, you follow her out, back into the warm corridors where the air smells of stone and sunlight, and the faint metallic tang of decision-making. You slip along the cool stone corridor as the Kandake drifts toward the temple wing, her shadow gliding ahead like a silk banner. The palace grows quieter here, the chatter of servants thinning until only the sound of sandals brushing reed mats remains. The air changes too, heavier, sweeter, as though it's holding its breath for the gods. Somewhere up ahead, you hear the slow rhythm of a ceremonial drum, low enough to feel in your ribs. You emerge into a sunlit colonnade that frames the entrance to the royal temple. The outer walls are carved with ranks of painted deities, their eyes outlined in black coal, their hands raised in frozen benediction. The smell of frankincense and burnt myrrh hangs thick and pleasant in the warm air, like a spice market, having a particularly pious day. A pair of priests in linen skirts and leopard skin sashes stand motionless by the doorway, faces as serene as freshly carved soap. One blinks once in what might be the local equivalent of good morning. The queen pauses at the top of the steps, and the priests bow until their foreheads nearly brush the stone. One of them begins chanting, voice dry and melodic, like sand pouring from a jar. The words are ancient, older even than the city itself, and you don't understand a single syllable. Somehow that makes them sound even more powerful, as though meaning might crumble if stared at too directly. Historians still argue whether this chant is a holdover from older Napata traditions or a Meroitic innovation, but either way, it's catchy in a solemn, slightly unsettling way. Inside, the temple is dim and cool, a relief after the bright courtyard. The ceiling arch is low, painted in deep cobalt and scattered with tiny gold stars, as if you've stepped into a pocket-sized night sky. The walls are lined with tall sandstone columns, carved to resemble bundled papyrus stalks. Between them, niches hold bronze oil lamps whose flames waver gently as you pass, throwing soft amber halos on the stone. At the far end, on a raised platform, sits the offering altar. It's draped in embroidered linen, and around it lie neat rows of goods, baskets of figs, honey jars sealed with wax, alabaster bowls of milk, loaves of fresh bread still steaming faintly, and one particularly judgmental-looking goose who seems to have wandered in from a side door and decided to stay. A pair of priestesses fan the altar with ostrich plumes, their movements slow and hypnotic, like dream fragments. The queen approaches the altar in silence. An attendant steps forward carrying a shallow dish filled with powdered gold, which glints like sunlight caught in sand. She dips her fingers in and sprinkles it lightly across the altar, the flecks catching in the lamplight as they fall. The gesture is small but electric, like striking a match in a dark room. You can feel the priests holding their breath. Next, she places a carved ivory figurine of Amun, the ram-headed god, onto the linen. Its painted eyes seem to glare with eternal disapproval, which might just be the default ram expression. She bows her head briefly, not low but deeply still, the way mountains bow when they pretend to be clouds. One priest mutters something about divine favor. Another mutters something about the goose. There's a brief flurry of activity as servants light more incense cones, filling the air with sweet, smoky tendrils that curl around your ankles and sneak up your nose. It smells like cinnamon decided to marry thunder. The musicians begin playing softly on small lyres, the notes tremulous and silver like moth wings. The queen lifts a small alabaster jar, removes its stopper, and pours a ribbon of oil across the altar. The oil gleams as it soaks into the linen. One priest quietly counts the drops under his breath, perhaps to ensure the offering is neither too stingy nor so generous that the gods become spoiled. Historians still argue whether the number of drops symbolize days of the solar calendar, or simply however many seemed dramatic. For a moment, the world seems to contract around her, just the slow curl of incense, the flicker of flames reflected in her gold bracelets, the shimmer of the oil sinking into cloth. You find yourself holding your breath without meaning to. The offering is both intimate and grand, like leaving flowers on the doorstep of eternity. Then, as simply as it began, it ends. The priests bow. The musicians let the final notes linger, fragile as cobwebs. The queen straightens, and just like that, the room exhales. The goose honks softly, as if to mark the occasion. She turns and glides from the altar, her linen pleats whispering against the sandstone floor. Servants rush forward to collect the empty dishes and refresh the offerings before the desert heat can even think about spoiling them. The priests retreat into the shadows like figures folding back into a tapestry. The faint shimmer of powdered gold still sparkles on the altar, tiny stars left behind as proof that something sacred happened here, even if no one can quite explain what. As you follow her back toward the sunlight, the temple's shadows seem to cling to your shoulders, reluctant to let go. Outside, the day has grown hotter, the courtyard buzzing with cicadas and sunlight bouncing blindingly off the whitewashed walls. The queen doesn't glance back at the temple. She doesn't have to. Whatever bargain she just struck with the gods is already sealed in gold dust and goose approval. You blink in the sudden brightness, the temple's cool hush still wrapped around your thoughts. And you realize something. This wasn't about asking for blessings. It was about reminding everyone, herself included, that she already carries them. The palace corridors widen again, letting in angled slices of sunlight that make the dust motes look like lazy golden bees. The Kandake moves with measured calm, and you follow her into a quieter wing of the complex, where the air smells faintly of ink and dried reeds. This is the domain of the palace scribes, and it hums with a very specific kind of tension, the kind that comes from knowing even the slightest mistake will be immortalized for centuries. The scriptorium is long and narrow, its walls painted with faded murals of quills, scrolls, and what appears to be an extremely judgmental baboon. Rows of low wooden desks line the room, each occupied by a scribe perched cross-legged on woven mats. Their heads are bent low, faces shiny with concentration, as their reed pens scratch over shards of broken pottery called ostraca. You hear the soft, steady rasp like a field of crickets who've taken up calligraphy. A scribe master stands at the front with the posture of a man who has seen too many incorrect hieroglyphs in his life. His robe is simple but impeccably pressed, and his hairline seems to retreat out of sheer caution. He bows deeply as the queen enters, then claps once, sharp as a snapped reed. Instantly the room stills. Dozens of young scribes look up, eyes wide, hands frozen mid-stroke. One has managed to spill ink on his own elbow, and he looks as though he's reconsidering literacy as a life choice. The queen glides between the rows, her gold bracelets chiming softly. The air feels suddenly thin, like everyone collectively forgot how to breathe. She pauses to observe a boy who can't be more than 12. He's copying the flowing Meroitic script onto his shard, each symbol like a curling vine. His tongue pokes out the corner of his mouth in pure concentration. Historians still argue about the full phonetics of the Meroitic script. It remains only partially deciphered today, but the boy's brushstrokes are steady, careful, and weirdly elegant for someone who probably still gets scolded for forgetting sandals. She leans down slightly, eyes narrowing in scrutiny. The boy freezes. You're fairly sure his soul briefly leaves his body and hovers near the ceiling for safety. After a long moment, she nods once and continues walking. The boy exhales so hard, his ostracon slides off the desk and clinks on the floor. No one dares react. At another desk, an older scribe writes on a smooth strip of parchment, the ink dark and glossy. He's copying trade tallies from the southern caravans, columns of symbols representing jars of honey, lengths of dyed cloth, and something only labeled miscellaneous wonders, which seems like either very bad record-keeping or very good marketing. The Queen murmurs a question too quietly for you to catch, and the man answers in a rapid, breathless stream, clearly hoping if he talks fast enough, she won't notice the small smear of ink on his nose. The master scribe steps forward to present the day's lesson tablets. These are thin boards coated with clay, on which students practice carving glyphs with bronze styluses before copying them in ink. He explains how the palace curriculum includes mathematics, astronomy, religious law, and something called practical curse deflection, which sounds like the sort of elective you wish modern schools offered. He adds that discipline is strict, and any scribe caught dozing over his work must copy the entire hymn to Amun backward, a punishment both tedious and mildly blasphemous. The Queen listens, her expression unreadable, but you notice her gaze softening briefly as she watches a girl tracing a line of numbers. There's pride there, hidden under the still surface of her face. This room might look like a quiet hive of ink and nerves, but it's also where her kingdom's memory is being carved, drop by drop, into something that might outlive even her name. One boy sneezes, producing a small cloud of ink flecks. Everyone flinches as though lightning just struck, but the Queen simply tilts her head amused and moves on. The tension breaks like a jar cracking. Several students resume breathing. The master scribe sags slightly, relieved that no one has been transformed into a decorative scarab. Before leaving, the Queen pauses at a ceremonial cabinet tucked in the back wall. It's carved from ebony and inlaid with ivory lotuses, and when an attendant opens it, you glimpse its contents, the royal archives. Bundles of papyrus scrolls tied with silk, wooden tally sticks etched with symbols, even a few thin metal plates inscribed with royal decrees. They smell faintly of old rain and something dry and brittle, like history's attic. The Queen lifts one of the scrolls and unrolls it just enough to see the tight, even rows of ink. You wonder what it says. Maybe an ancient treaty or a list of palace kitchen complaints from 2 centuries ago. Too many figs, not enough dramatic flair. Whatever it is, her eyes flick across it with quick, sharp focus. Then she returns it without comment. The master scribe bows again so low he nearly folds in half. The young students imitate him, though one gets his foot tangled in his mat and has to pretend it's all part of a very reverent dance. The Queen exits without a word, her bracelets whispering like small wind chimes. The tension in the room collapses behind her like a tent after a storm. You linger just a moment, listening as the scratching of pens resumes, hesitant at first and then steadier, like rain finding its rhythm again. One of the boys dips his pen in ink with trembling fingers and mutters something about surviving until lunch. Then you follow her back into the sunlit corridor, where the air is warm and dry again, smelling of sandstone and distant garden blooms. Behind you, the scriptorium hums on, busy carving the Queen's world into symbols small enough to fit in the palm of a hand and heavy enough to last for millennia. The corridor opens into sunlight again, and the smell hits you first. Warm, earthy, and faintly sweet, like sun-toasted grain and stored summer. The Kandake is heading toward the royal granaries, and a cluster of nervous-looking stewards hurry ahead, their arms full of tally rods and their faces already glistening with preemptive anxiety. You trail behind her through a narrow archway, and the air immediately shifts, thicker, drier, almost chewy with the weight of stored harvests. The granary yard is enclosed by tall mud brick walls, the color of baked honey. Inside are several round silos with domed tops, each one painted with protective symbols, suns, cobras, and the occasional cat doing what might be an enthusiastic dance. Historians still argue whether those cat figures were sacred emblems or just early doodles by bored guards. Either way, they lend the silos an oddly festive vibe, like someone tried to make food security look adorable. The Queen pauses at the threshold, and the stewards bow so low they might actually be hoping the earth will swallow them, before she notices any missing barley. Their leader, a wiry man with the haunted look of someone who dreams in spreadsheets, scurries forward clutching a waxed wooden tablet covered in tally marks. He launches into a report about grain shipments from the countryside, his voice pitching higher with every syllable. While he speaks, you notice the details around you, the faint hiss of sand sliding off the domes as the wind picks up, the smell of sun-warmed sorghum, the low hum of bees exploring cracks in the mud brick. A few laborers climb the silo ladders barefoot, their baskets balanced on their heads as casually as hats. They tip the baskets into the storage openings, and cascades of pale millet spill down like tiny waterfalls, pattering softly into the darkness below. The Queen listens in silence, her gaze slow and level as the sun. When the steward stammers something about minor rodent enthusiasm in one of the far silos, her eyebrow arches just slightly. It's astonishing how much judgment can fit into such a tiny movement. The steward flails into assurances about new clay jar traps, reinforced doors, and possibly hiring a team of exceptionally judgmental cats. She walks forward, the stewards trailing like nervous ducklings. An attendant pulls open a heavy wooden hatch, and a puff of warm, grain-scented air rolls out. Inside, the silo is dark and cavernous, its walls lined with woven reed mats to keep out damp. The floor slopes slightly toward the center, where the grain is heaped in a golden mound that gleams softly in the slanting light. She steps just inside, the soles of her sandals sinking slightly into loose grain. It makes a sound like soft applause. She scoops a handful, lets it trickle through her fingers, and watches how the kernels fall. You have no idea what she's looking for, moisture, pests, possibly whether the grain has achieved enlightenment, but she seems satisfied. A tiny lizard darts across the far wall and freezes, its eyes bright as beads. One of the stewards follows its path with mute horror, clearly terrified it will be blamed for any future missing bread loaves. The Queen glances at the lizard, then at the steward and smiles just barely, so faint you almost think you imagined it. The steward exhales like he's been holding his breath since childhood. Back outside, the stewards rush to open a series of clay-sealed jars arranged neatly along the wall. They hold samples of dried dates, lentils, chickpeas, and something labeled in neat ink as experimental tubers. You decide not to ask. The Queen examines each with the same steady calm, occasionally tapping a fingernail against a jar, as if listening for secrets. The sound is soft, but somehow makes the stewards flinch as though it were thunder. The master steward mentions that last season's floods delayed some harvests, but surplus from the southern estates has kept the stores full. Historians still argue whether the kingdom's intricate irrigation systems were managed by local villages or centrally overseen from the palace. Judging by the steward's tone, you suspect the correct answer is whoever could survive the paperwork. The queen nods once, a small gesture that ripples outward like a dropped pebble. The stewards collectively sag in visible relief, spines deflating like punctured water skins. One even smiles faintly before catching himself and snapping back into professional terror. As the inspection winds down, you notice a small shrine tucked into the corner of the yard, a simple stone niche holding a clay figurine of a grain goddess, her round belly painted with faded gold. Someone has left her an offering of 2 figs and what looks like a slightly apologetic loaf of bread. A fat pigeon sits on the shrine roof, eyeing everyone with the serene arrogance of one who knows it controls the global bread supply. The queen lingers for a moment before the shrine. She doesn't kneel, but she pauses just long enough for the sunlight to catch the edge of her bracelets, throwing a flash of gold across the figurine's face. The pigeon coos approvingly, or possibly just competitively. Then she turns away, and the stewards scatter to reseal the hatches and shoo away any lurking lizards that dare dream of empire. As you follow her out of the granary yard, the air shifts again, lighter and cooler without the stored warmth of so much grain. Behind you, the mud brick silos loom like quiet suns holding the kingdom's future kernel by kernel. Ahead the palace stretches on, corridors unraveling like sun-bleached ribbon. You realize the queen didn't scold or threaten or even speak much at all. She just looked, and the entire room bent around her like reeds in the wind. That you think might be scarier than shouting, and infinitely more effective. By the time you leave the granary yard, the sun has climbed higher, the air rippling faintly like hot glass. The Kandake moves through the palace halls with her usual unhurried certainty, though now a subtle tension hums in the air, a shift in tone, like the orchestra tuning up before something important. Ahead the corridors grow wider, their walls hung with dyed linen banners that stir faintly in the warm breeze. A line of guards in polished bronze stand at attention, their spears gleaming like sunbeams trying to impersonate trees. Today foreign envoys have arrived, and the palace is about to become a theater. You follow her into the Hall of Palms, named for the tall fluted columns carved to resemble palm trunks. Their capitals blossom into stone fronds that curl toward the ceiling, which is painted a deep lapis blue, spattered with gold stars. The air smells of cedar and something faintly citrusy, like someone spritzed a very expensive secret. The envoys are already waiting. They stand clustered on the mosaic floor in carefully arranged awe, their eyes darting like minnows. Each wears the finery of their homeland. A delegation from Axum draped in thick cotton robes with bands of embroidered silver, 2 traders from Ptolemaic Egypt in flowing linen and too much eyeliner, and a lone man from the far western deserts whose robe is the color of copper dust and whose headdress bristles with ostrich feathers, so large they look like they might take flight and drag him. Along their gifts lie neatly arranged before them, baskets of dried dates and honeycomb wrapped in palm leaves, carved ebony boxes bound in ivory, ostrich plumes fanned like suns, and one very confused baby leopard, wearing a gold collar and an expression of deep personal betrayal. It yawns hugely, showing teeth like pearl needles, then plops down with the weary dignity of someone who has been awake for 20 whole minutes. The herald strikes the floor with his staff, and the sound ricochets through the chamber like a starting pistol. Everyone falls silent. The queen enters, framed by her attendants like a moving painting. Her linen gown gleams in the shafts of light, and the cobras on her crown flash like twin sparks. She crosses the mosaic floor without a sound, though somehow the air seems to ripple outward with every step. The envoys drop into bows, some elegant, some dangerously wobbly. The Egyptian traders fold nearly in half. The Aksumite nobles go to one knee with practiced smoothness. The feathered man from the west simply lowers his chin an inch, as if bowing to anyone might cause the sun to reverse course. The queen takes her seat on the low dais at the far end, reclining slightly on cushions of deep crimson silk. The herald announces each envoy by name, titles cascading out like ribbons. A scribe kneels nearby with a writing board on his lap, poised to record every word of this delicate dance, presumably in very tiny handwriting. The Aksumite spokesman steps forward first, offering his gifts with both hands and an expression hovering between reverence and stage fright. He speaks in measured tones about trade caravans, iron tools, and mutual prosperity. His words flow like smooth river water, and you can almost see him mentally rehearsing each sentence 5 seconds ahead of his mouth. Historians still argue whether the kingdom of Aksum and Kush ever formed formal treaties, or just politely pretended they had while quietly trying to outshine each other with fancier elephant. Harnesses, the queen listens without blinking, fingers resting lightly on the lion-headed armrest. When he finishes, she inclines her head the tiniest fraction, which seems to cause the man's soul to re-enter his body. Next come the Egyptians. Their spokesman launches into an enthusiastic speech about the enduring friendship between the Ptolemaic Egypt court and Kushite royalty, punctuated by frequent flourishes of his eyeliner-lined eyes. He presents ostrich plumes and jars of perfumed oil, as well as what he dramatically calls the finest honey ever to exist. The queen accepts these with the faintest nod. She does not smile, which somehow feels more powerful than a standing ovation. Finally, the Western envoy steps forward. He says very little, his words slow and rough-edged, but he places before her a small pouch of shimmering red stones and, with surprising gentleness, the sleepy leopard cub. The cub blinks up at the queen, yawns again and flops on its side with the sound of someone giving up on ambition. The envoy murmurs that it will grow to guard her throne. Historians still argue whether such exotic animals were truly kept in Nubian courts, or just given away as high-stakes good luck charms that someone else had to deal with later. The queen finally speaks, her voice quiet, but carrying like a thread pulled taut across the room. She thanks them for their gifts and says she hopes the roads between their lands will remain well-trodden and well-fed, which is royal speak, for don't make me send my army to encourage commerce. Then comes the real theater, the return gifts. Attendants glide forward bearing trays draped in silk. They present gold bangles shaped like lotus buds, bolts of moroitic-dyed linen that shimmer like desert heat, and slender jars of rare blue pigment prized across the world. The queen gives these with serene generosity, though you notice she never quite touches the gifts herself, as though her hands must remain untouched by the logistics of gratitude. The envoys bow deeply again, their relief so palpable you can almost see it misting off them. The baby leopard sneezes and then begins chewing on the corner of a tapestry, which no one dares to stop. The Egyptian traders shuffle backward with the careful smiles of men who have just survived a thunderstorm while holding porcelain. When they finally withdraw, the chamber seems to exhale. The queen stands, and the courtiers bow in a ripple like a field of grain caught by wind. She turns and glides out, leaving the gifts behind like shed sunlight. You follow her back into the quiet hallway, the sudden hush after all that ceremony ringing in your ears. Behind you, servants are already scooping up the leopard and whisking it off to wherever the palace keeps its improbable pets. Their head, the queen walks on as though she's just finished tying a ribbon on the horizon. You can't help thinking how strange diplomacy is here. No signatures, no contracts, just quiet words and glittering objects and the heavy gravity of her gaze. And yet somehow empires bend to it. The air shifts the moment she steps outside the echoing halls, thinning from incense-thick solemnity to the lively, sun-soaked hum of the city beyond. The Kandake turns down a shaded passage lined with tall papyrus-painted columns, her pace easing as if the weight of ceremony has been briefly set aside. A pair of guards peel off to clear the way ahead, though clear might be generous, because beyond this archway lies the market quarter, and the market quarter bows to no schedule, not even a queen's. You pass under the arch and are immediately wrapped in sound. The palace's quiet dissolves like sugar in tea. The air here buzzes with the chatter of traders, the clatter of ceramic jars, the bray of a stubborn donkey who clearly resents every atom in its vicinity. A smell storm rolls over you. Honey and cumin, sun-warmed clay, goat cheese, sweat, and fresh figs all elbowing for attention. The heat tastes faintly of iron and apricots. The market stretches along a wide, packed earth avenue, shaded by woven palm mats strung between wooden poles. Stalls spill outward like seashells, every surface stacked or dangling with something, gleaming copper pots, jars of dried hibiscus petals, garlands of garlic, carved ivory hairpins shaped like gazelles, heaps of indigo-dyed cloth so deep in color they seem to drink the sunlight. Historians still argue whether these markets were run as state-controlled fairs or loosely supervised free-for-alls. Judging by the joyful chaos, you suspect the latter. The queen walks slowly, deliberately, as if she owns not just the market, but the sun lighting it. The crowd ripples back to give her space. Traders and shoppers bow their heads as she passes, though many immediately peek up again, curiosity crackling like static. Children freeze mid-game to stare, mouths open like small awestruck frogs. A spice merchant near the entrance hastily pushes forward a tray of honey cakes shaped like lotus flowers. Their surfaces are glossy with syrup, and they smell like they were baked by kindly deities. The queen accepts one, breaks off a piece, and eats it with serene slowness. For a terrifying moment you think she might smile. She doesn't, but the faint softening around her eyes sends the merchant into an ecstatic bow that nearly inverts him. Farther along, a jeweler calls out an offer in a voice like a cracked bell. His stall is an explosion of color, strands of lapis beads polished carnelian, slivers of turquoise set in gold. He holds up a pendant carved into the shape of a crocodile and wiggles it hopefully. The queen stops, considers it for precisely 2 heartbeats, and moves on. The jeweler looks both crushed and honored, which seems to be the market's standard emotional combo. The noise rises and folds around you. Drums thump somewhere, irregular but compelling. A man balances 3 clay water jars on his shoulders, like improbable pets. A cluster of old women squat near a basket of pomegranates, discussing something with such passionate hand gestures, you briefly suspect they're planning a coup. You spot a row of scribes for hire at low tables near the edge of the avenue. Their reed pens dance furiously as they write letters for clients who hover anxiously, dictating in rapid bursts. One man finishes and dusts the papyrus with crushed charcoal to dry the ink, then blows on it with exaggerated drama. The queen glances their way, and all of them abruptly sit straighter as though a gust of divine posture has struck. She pauses at a pottery stall, where the shelves are stacked with bowls painted in swirling red and black, designs, stylized fish, curling reeds, and something that might be a very optimistic giraffe. The potter, hands coated in clay up to the elbows, bows so fast he nearly faceplants. She lifts one bowl, runs a finger along its rim and sets it back with a nod. He exhales like he's just survived a lightning strike and immediately shouts for his apprentice to fetch more of the good glaze. Oh, Ardit, girl weaving reed baskets on a mat by her. Mother Stall stares up at the queen with eyes round as moons. The queen meets her gaze for half a breath and, barely but unmistakably, tilts her head in acknowledgement. The girl's jaw drops. She immediately tries to curtsy, while still sitting cross-legged, and topples sideways into her basket. You pretend you didn't see. Historians still argue whether royal visits like this were meant as economic inspections or simply as political theatre, showing the Queen's accessibility. Watching her glide through the market now, you suspect it's both, and neither. She's not really shopping. She's reminding the city that she's real, that she walks the same dust as them, even if her sandals never quite get dirty. Toward the far end, the market thins into a food lane. The smell of grilling tilapia curls through the air, rich and savory. A man flips flatbreads on a clay griddle with quick flicks of his fingers, each movement practiced enough to be hypnotic. The queen doesn't stop, but her pace slows slightly as she passes, and you catch the barest twitch. At the corner of her mouth, the micro-expression of someone quietly promising herself that tilapia later will be magnificent. At the avenue's edge stands a public well, shaded by a lone sycamore fig tree. A line of women fill clay jars while gossiping in low musical voices, the rhythm of their chatter as steady as the creak of the pulley. One notices the queen and drops into a deep bow. The others follow like dominoes. The queen raises her hand slightly, palm out, a gesture both greeting and benediction. The women straighten, glowing as if they've been handed small suns. Then, just as gently as she arrived, she turns away. The crowd parts again, closing behind her like silk. The noise of the market swells back to full volume, as though someone turned the world's volume knob up by one sleepy click. You follow her back through the archway, the air cooling again as the palace's stone embraces you. Behind you, the market hums on, endless and alive, the city's heartbeat wrapped in the scent of honey cakes and grilled fish. Ahead, the queen glides on without looking back, leaving only the faint trace of lotus syrup on the breeze. The shift is almost dizzying. One moment you're wrapped in the bustling perfume and sweat haze of the market, and the next, you're stepping through a carved cedar doorway into stillness so soft it feels padded. The air cools, the light dims, and even the sound of your sandals seems to pull on a pair of slippers. The Kandake is leaving behind the city's heartbeat for something slower, quieter, her midday retreat in the palace gardens. The space opens suddenly, like a held breath let go. A long rectangular courtyard stretches out, its borders shaded by colonnades wrapped in flowering vines. The stone pavement gives way to dark, loamy earth, and you catch the faint shock of green, actual green, after hours of baked ochre and gold. Date palms line the central path, their fronds swaying gently in the faintest breeze like they're fanning secrets. The air is thick with the mingled scents of damp soil, sweet jasmine, and something musky you can't place until you spot them. Peacocks. 3 of them strut among the flower beds like jewel-encrusted gossips, tails half-fanned and shimmering, with impossible colors, emerald, sapphire, bronze, each feather an argument for unnecessary beauty. One lets out a shrill cry that sounds like a rusty door startled by its own feelings. Servants have laid a broad linen canopy between two palms, its edges weighted with smooth river stones. Beneath it, a mound of cushions and embroidered carpets waits like a friendly cloud. The queen sinks into it with the kind of slow, measured exhale only available to people who absolutely run things. An attendant immediately kneels to unlace her sandals, while another fans her with an ostrich plume so enormous it could probably generate its own weather. You notice how the sunlight filters down in gentle shifting patterns through the palms, dappling her skin and gold jewelry in soft, leaf-shaped glints. She stretches her legs out, tilts her head back, and closes her eyes. The sheer confidence it takes to nap while being queen of everything could power an entire city. A pair of musicians sit cross-legged at the edge of the canopy. One plucks a lyre, its strings humming like bees on holiday, while the other taps a frame drum in a slow, heartbeat rhythm. The sound seeps into your bones like warm syrup. You can feel your shoulders unspooling just listening. Historians still argue whether such midday rests were ritualized as sacred pauses or simply personal indulgence, though judging by how thoroughly she's melting into her cushions, the correct answer is probably both. A servant brings a shallow silver bowl of cool water perfumed with rose petals. The queen dips her fingertips in, swirls them lazily, and lets the droplets slide down her wrists. Another servant offers a dish of dates stuffed with almonds and honey. She eats one with unhurried precision, then sets the rest aside as though she's just completed an athletic feat and must pace herself. The garden around you hums softly with life. Cicadas drone somewhere beyond the walls, steady as a lullaby. A lizard skitters up a sun-warmed rock, pauses dramatically as if posing for a royal coin, then flicks its tail and vanishes into the flower beds. A breeze ripples through the date palms, carrying the faint sweetness of ripening fruit and the distant murmur of the Nile like a giant cat purring beyond the city. A peacock ambles over, clearly emboldened by generations of zero personal consequences. It eyes the bowl of dates with the focus of a seasoned jewel thief. The queen cracks one eyelid open. They lock gazes. After a tense pause, the peacock performs a slow, exaggerated pivot and saunters off, tail swishing like an offended dowager. You bite back a laugh, which earns you a glance from one of the attendants sharp enough to peel fruit. Eventually, the music fades to silence. The queen shifts onto her side, propping her head on one arm, and simply dozes. Her breathing evens out, slow and deep. Even her jewelry seems to relax, lying in quiet arcs of gold across the cushions. It's oddly intimate seeing the fortress of her composure soften. For a moment, she looks almost like anyone else, just a woman, tired from being monumental all morning. The attendants settle into perfect stillness around her, eyes down as if the entire world has agreed to whisper. You lie back on the warm flagstones outside the canopy, staring up through the shifting palm leaves at a sky so blue it looks like it forgot how to end. Time loosens. The hum of insects grows louder. Or maybe your mind just gets smaller, like a stone sinking into still water. Historians still argue whether these palace gardens were stocked with rare imported plants or simply native species coaxed into abundance. Looking at the perfectly arranged rows of hibiscus, the citrus trees humming with bees, and the tiny channel of water trickling through a carved stone rill, you decide the answer is probably whichever was more complicated. The effort behind this tranquility is invisible, which is maybe the point. The queen stirs faintly, not quite waking, just adjusting as the breeze shifts. One of the peacocks, apparently unable to help itself, lets out another melancholy scream from across the courtyard. No one moves. The sound drifts upward and dissolves in the shimmering heat. You close your eyes for just a moment, lulled by the drum of cicadas and the smell of crushed jasmine. It's hard to remember there's a kingdom outside these walls. Right now, there's only this shaded bubble of calm, this quiet heartbeat at the center of empire, where even the most unstoppable woman alive lets herself stop. The queen wakes not with a start, but with the serene inevitability of sunrise deciding its time. One eye opens, then the other, and for a moment she simply lies there, letting the world catch up to her. The peacocks have dozed into jewel-toned puddles nearby, their tails sprawled like expensive rugs. A cicada drones on stubbornly, like a small wind-up alarm clock that doesn't know who it's dealing with. An attendant silently offers her a cloth scented with mint water. She presses it to her face, then sits up, her jewelry settling into place with a soft chime. As if even the gold is relieved, she's vertical again. The Kandake stretches her arms slowly overhead, vertebrae clicking like distant castanets. Then, without a word, she stands, and the quiet dissolves like mist. Everyone else stands too, as though pulled by strings. You follow as she leaves the garden through a shaded archway, the air growing warmer and dustier as the smell of flowers fades behind you. This wing of the palace is louder, echoing faintly with deep rumbling sounds, and the occasional abrupt trumpet blast that makes your ribs vibrate. The queen's pace quickens just slightly, and you catch a rare flicker of something close to excitement in her eyes. You emerge into a long, open courtyard, lined with heavy stone posts wrapped in chains. Beyond them are the royal elephant stables, and the scent hits like a wall, sweet hay, sun-baked earth, and the sharp tang of enormous personalities. The stable is enormous, roofed in palm thatch and open on all sides to the breeze. Shadows dapple the hard-packed ground. Several elephants stand calmly in their stalls, swishing their tails with the lazy gravitas of creatures who know they outweigh everyone's opinions. Their tusks are capped with bronze to protect the ivory, and colorful cloths embroidered with gold thread drape their broad backs like regal picnic blankets. One particularly massive bull elephant leans against a post, eyes half-lidded, trunk curling idly through a hanging net of dates. A handler, a wiry man whose entire aura radiates resigned affection, claps softly to get his attention, and the elephant responds by slowly turning its head as though rotating an entire continent. The queen approaches, and the air seems to thicken with quiet awe. Even the cicadas hush. The elephant lifts its trunk and makes a low resonant rumble that seems to vibrate the soles of your feet. Historians still argue whether these elephants were trained for ceremonial processions, war, or simply to make visiting dignitaries question their life choices. Judging by the gleam in this one's eye, the answer might be yes. An attendant produces a basket of ripe bananas. The queen takes one, peels it with deliberate grace, and offers it. The elephant accepts, curling its trunk around her wrist with surprising delicacy. She strokes its forehead as it chews, and you swear it looks blissful, eyelids drooping like heavy curtains. A palace groom nearby murmurs that his name is something unpronounceable involving 4 syllables and a whistle, which the queen shortens to a single syllable that somehow conveys both affection and command. Another elephant, a younger female, sidles over, flapping her ears hopefully. The queen feeds her as well, laughing softly, a sound so rare and brief you wonder if you imagined it. The laugh startles a stable boy, who promptly drops a broom and tries to catch it with his foot, resulting in a slow-motion collapse that somehow ends with him bowing. The handlers line the elephants up for a quick inspection. They step forward in practiced rhythm, their enormous feet thumping like muffled drums. The queen walks down the line, her gaze sharp and appraising, checking the condition of their tusk caps, the gloss of their hides, the steadiness of their gait. She pauses to examine a fresh design painted in ochre on one elephant's flank. A swirling sunburst pattern edged with tiny lotus petals. It looks like someone convinced a thundercloud to attend a festival. The chief handler explains in a nervous rush that they're preparing these elephants for an upcoming ceremonial procession. He adds that they've been practicing bowing in unison, though one particularly stubborn elephant has philosophical objections. The queen tilts her head, amused, and suggests they try bribing him with honeyed barley. The handler looks both horrified and enlightened, as though she's just handed him the secret to life. Nearby, a pair of apprentices scrub a smaller elephant with stiff brushes, water flying in glittering arcs as they work. The elephant closes its eyes and leans into the brushing like a house cat, occasionally letting out a low, satisfied groan that rattles your teeth. One apprentice whispers to the other about how this elephant once stole a basket of figs and tried to hide them under its ear. The queen pretends not to hear, though you catch the faintest shimmer of amusement on her lips. Historians still argue whether keeping elephants in royal stables was a purely practical decision or part of a symbolic claim to divine strength. Watching her move among them now, stroking their trunks and murmuring in a language low and musical, you start to think it's neither. Maybe they're just her colossal, thundering reminders that even power needs gentleness to work. When she finishes the inspection, the elephants line up again, trunks raised in salute. She stands perfectly still for a heartbeat longer, and for a moment you could swear they're bowing to her not because they were trained to, but because they want to. Then she turns away, and the spell breaks. The elephants rumble softly, shifting their massive feet, and the handlers exhale as though they've been underwater. The stable boy retrieves his broom with exaggerated dignity. You follow her back toward the shadowed corridor, ears still ringing with the echo of elephant rumbles. Behind you, one trumpets abruptly, so loud and jubilant it nearly shakes the dust from the rafters, and the queen doesn't even flinch. The soundscape changes as you follow the Kandake out of the echoing elephant courtyard and into the open palace grounds again. The low rumble of tusked giants fades behind you, replaced by the soft clatter of sandals and the faint chatter of sparrows nesting in the roof beams. Ahead stretches a broad portico shaded by sycamore figs, their wide leaves casting pools of dappled shadow on the warm flagstones. The air feels stiller here, heavier somehow, as though even the breeze pauses to listen. This is where the queen will sit in judgment. A group of palace attendants are already arranging the space, setting out a carved ebony chair beneath the largest sycamore. Its bark is pale and mottled like old parchment, and its roots bulge gently from the soil, as if the earth itself is trying to watch. A servant lays down a woven reed mat at the queen's feet and sets beside it a tall ceramic jug, beaded with condensation. The sweet tart scent of tamarind drifts out as another attendant pours the juice into a shallow bronze cup. People are gathering in the courtyard, a scattering of villagers. Merchants and petitioners from the city, their faces a mix of nervous hope and sweaty determination. They kneel or crouch in loose groups along the edge of the flagstones, clutching small clay tokens that serve as their place in the order of petitions. A court scribe stands to one side with his writing board, his reed pen poised like a coiled insect. His expression suggests he has prepared for both legal precedent and interpretive chaos. The queen steps into the shade, her shadow stretching long over the stone, and lowers herself onto the chair with a fluidity that makes the whole motion look ceremonial. The murmurs of the crowd fall away as though someone's tightened an invisible drawstring. Even the sparrows seem to hold their beaks shut. The first case begins two brothers arguing about ownership of a stretch of irrigation canal. They speak in quick overlapping bursts, hands flapping like startled herons. The queen listens without moving, her gaze calm as wet clay. When they finish, she asks three precise questions that immediately make both of them look like they regret having spoken at all. Then she rules, splitting the disputed canal evenly between them and assigning them joint responsibility for its upkeep. They both nod, relieved and slightly stunned, like men who expected lightning and got a firm handshake instead. A merchant comes forward next, bowing so deeply his forehead almost dents the flagstones. He complains about his neighbor's goats repeatedly invading his date orchard and consuming, as he dramatically puts it, the dreams of 3 harvest seasons. The queen tilts her head, considers, and decrees that the neighbor must build a taller fence and also provide 2 baskets of dates to the merchant as restitution. The merchant beams as if she's just promised him eternal happiness and unlimited figs. Then comes a young woman, clutching a woven basket that rattles faintly. Inside are fragments of painted pottery. She explains in a trembling voice that her landlord accused her of breaking palace-issued jars and wants to fine her an impossible sum. She claims the jars were already cracked. The queen examines the fragments, tapping one delicately with her fingernail. It rings dull and hollow. She orders the fine cancelled, declares the jars unfit for use, and warns the landlord, through clenched politeness, that next time he tries to cheat a tenant, she will personally inspect his walls for cracks. Somewhere in the crowd, someone snorts into their sleeve and tries to turn it into a cough. Historians still argue whether these public judgments were primarily legal proceedings or theatrical demonstrations of royal benevolence. Watching now, you think it's both. The law matters, but so does the performance, the way her voice never rises, the way her eyes never flicker, the way each verdict lands like a carefully placed stone that redirects the river without splashing. Between cases, the attendants refill her bronze cup. She sips tamarind juice with the measured calm of someone who could, if she wanted, reassign your entire family tree before finishing the drink. The sweet-sour tang makes your mouth water just from the smell. A boy approaches, perhaps 10 years old, holding a tiny clay tablet in shaking hands. He claims his neighbor stole his pet tortoise. The crowd stirs amused. The queen does not smile, but her voice softens by a hair's breadth as she questions him. The neighbor is called forward, a grizzled old man who admits with remarkable indignation that the tortoise simply moved into his courtyard and seemed happier there. The queen rules that the tortoise may choose its own home. Whichever yard it wanders to tomorrow will decide the matter. The boy looks both disappointed and impressed. The old man bows stiffly, muttering something about fair tortoises. The sun edges westward as the cases continue. A steady stream of quarrels about grazing rights, spilled dye, wandering donkeys, disputed debts, and one allegation of unlicensed prophecy. Each time, the queen listens, cuts through the noise with a few clean questions, and issues a decision that leaves the air feeling lighter, as though someone has brushed away invisible cobwebs. Eventually, the last petitioner bows and withdraws, clutching his clay token like a talisman. The crowd disperses in low murmurs, sandals scuffing the flagstones. The sparrows resume chattering in the branches, as if they'd been waiting for their own verdict. The queen rises, stretching slightly, and hands her empty cup to an attendant. The scribe closes his writing board with a snap, ink drying in dark speckles across the clay. The great sycamore stands silent overhead, its broad leaves trembling faintly in the breeze like applause muffled by distance. As she walks away from the shade, the sunlight spills over her like liquid brass. Behind her, the courtyard exhales. Disputes have been settled, grudges redirected, the machinery of justice oiled with calm and tamarind. You follow her back toward the palace's inner halls, blinking in the brightness, half expecting to see a small tortoise trudging triumphantly in either direction. The heat eases as the Kandake steps back into the shaded passageways, her pace loosening again, now that judgment has been dispensed and the air is no longer buzzing with grievances. The stone underfoot is cool, the corridors hushed except for the distant echo of a mallet striking bronze, an oddly rhythmic, almost musical sound that guides you onward. The air begins to smell of warm clay, beeswax, and something sharper, like freshly struck metal. You follow her through a carved cedar door and into the palace artisan's court, and the world instantly blooms with color and clamor. Sunlight slants in from open skylights, illuminating rows of low workshops arranged around a central courtyard. The ground is scattered with flecks of lapis and carnelian, like someone smashed a rainbow and then decided to build an empire out of it. Here, craft is its own language. Jewelers sit cross-legged at low benches, their tools arrayed in precise rows like a priest's ritual set. They polish gold cuffs until they gleam like small captive suns, or fit tiny turquoise tiles into broad collars shaped like crescent moons. Potters kneel beside slow-turning wheels, coaxing vases from spinning clay with fingers so steady it's hypnotic. One of them hums softly, off-key but determined, like a kettle dreaming of freedom. The queen glides between the workshops, attendants trailing like commas. The artisans rise, or in the case of one potter, nearly topple off his stool trying to bow while still clutching a wobbling vase. The vase wobbles harder, then miraculously recovers, earning a discreet ripple of applause from his peers. She pauses at the jeweler's row. One elderly goldsmith, with hands as gnarled as olive branches, presents a newly finished pectoral, a broad collar of hammered gold inset with tiny faience beads in the shape of papyrus blossoms. It catches the sunlight and throws it back in sharp, tiny flashes that make your eyes water. The queen examines it without touching, her gaze slow and exact. Then she nods once. The goldsmith exhales like a collapsing bellows and discreetly wipes his forehead with the corner of his apron. At the next bench, a younger jeweler holds up a ring shaped like a coiled cobra, its hood flared and tiny garnet eyes glinting. He can't be more than 20, and his hands tremble as he offers it. The queen studies the ring, tilts her head, and then very faintly smiles. The poor boy looks like he might dissolve into joyous dust. Farther along, the potters are engaged in a heated whisper argument about glazes. One insists that the latest batch of blue pigment will withstand anything, even a catastrophic goat event. The other counters that nothing survives catastrophic goats. The queen pauses, listening, and murmurs that they should test the glaze on something unbreakable, like one of the royal accountants. The potters freeze, then laugh nervously when they realize she's joking. Probably. Historians still argue whether these palace workshops operated as royal monopolies or independent guilds under court supervision. Judging by the mix of frantic precision and barely contained bickering, you suspect it's a little of both. The queen doesn't micromanage. She just radiates the unspoken expectation that everything produced in her vicinity must be excellent enough to impress future archaeologists. In a shaded corner, a team of glassworkers heat slivers of sand-colored glass in a small furnace, spinning the molten threads into delicate beads on iron rods. The air near them ripples with heat, and the smell is sharp and mineral like rain on hot stone. One apprentice fumbles a bead, and it drops with a tiny plink. The queen glances over. The apprentice freezes like a startled gecko, then very slowly retrieves the bead while muttering what is probably a prayer to every god with a union card. She stops at a sculptor's platform where a half-finished statue of the queen herself towers from a block of pale sandstone. It's uncanny. Her face emerging from the rock, eyes half-carved, but already carrying that same distant serenity. You watch her watch herself. It's a strange loop, like seeing two mirrors face each other. After a long pause, she nods once to the sculptor. He bows so low you worry he might actually fold into an origami version of himself. One artisan presents something unexpected, a ceremonial fan made from woven reeds and gilded ostrich feathers. It's shaped like the rising sun, each feather tipped with tiny hammered gold caps that sparkle like dew. The queen takes it, tests its weight with a single slow sweep through the air, then hands it back without comment. The artisan beams as if she just handed him the keys to the weather. All around, the soundscape is a delicate chaos. Soft hammers on bronze, the hiss of quenching water, the creak of wood as potter's wheels spin, the murmured arithmetic of bead counters tallying finished pieces. Dust motes swirl in the golden light pouring down from the skylights, and for a moment the whole place feels like a dream about sunlight, deciding to become solid. The queen makes one last circuit of the courtyard. She says almost nothing, but every artisan she passes seems to straighten by instinct, their work growing just a shade steadier, as though her shadow sharpens their hands. That's the strange paradox of her presence. She doesn't need to command excellence. She just exists, and excellence happens like flowers leaning toward the sun. When she finally turns to leave, the courtyard exhales. The artisans murmur to each other, shoulders sagging, tools resuming their small bright noises. Someone quietly calls for more glaze. The potters immediately resume their debate about goats. You follow her back through the cedar doorway, the smell of beeswax and hot clay lingering on your skin like faint applause. Behind you, the artisans return to their humming chaos, already spinning more fragments of beauty for a queen who never needs to ask for them. The sound of clinking metal fades behind you as the Kandake steps back into the sunlight. The heat has softened now, sinking into the lazy golden warmth of late afternoon. Shadows lengthen along the courtyard stones like dark silk ribbons, and the air carries the faint resinous tang of bowstrings left basking too long in the sun. The queen walks with purpose toward the practice grounds, and you catch a faint spark of something unusual in her stride: anticipation. The archery court lies just beyond the outer gardens, enclosed by high sandstone walls that glow like embers. The ground is packed hard and level, marked with chalk lines that have faded into pale ghosts. Rows of straw targets stand at varying distances, each painted with concentric rings. A rack of bows leans nearby, their polished wooden curves catching the light. A stack of bundled reed arrows sits beside them, like sheaves of very opinionated wheat. Guards are already waiting, their bronze chest plates catching the last bright shards of sun. They bow low as she enters, their eyes politely blank, but their shoulders betraying a faint ripple of tension, because this is one of the rare times when they must watch their sovereign pick up a weapon and see if she can actually hit anything. She takes her place at the firing line without ceremony. An attendant offers her a bow, a recurve of laminated wood and horn, its surface dark as wet teak, its grip wrapped in dyed leather. She tests its tension with a slow pull, the bowstring creaking like a yawn. Her eyes narrow, calculating as if lining up the horizon. Historians still argue whether the queens of Kush actually practiced archery themselves or merely presided over ceremonial exhibitions. Judging by the way she settles her feet and rolls her shoulders, you're guessing this isn't ceremonial, this is personal. She nocks the first arrow and draws it back in one smooth motion. The string hums. The arrow flies, slicing the air with a hiss, and strikes just outside the center ring. A respectful murmur ripples through the guards. The queen's expression doesn't flicker. She knocks another. This time the string snaps with a sharper twang, and the arrow thuds dead center. The sound echoes off the sandstone walls like a small clap of thunder. The guards remain stone-faced, but one's left eyebrow twitches upward 0.5 millimeter. She fires again, and again. The arrows land in neat, tight clusters, each shaft quivering faintly as if applauding itself. The bow creaks with each draw, the sound almost hypnotic. The smell of warm resin and dry straw mixes with the metallic tang of tension. You find yourself holding your breath with each release, as if exhaling might tilt the world just enough to ruin her aim. At one point, an arrow goes wide, thunking into the outer wall with an anticlimactic puff of sandstone dust. No one breathes. The queen glances at it, tilts her head, and then shrugs very slightly, as if to say even the sun misses a spot sometimes. One of the guards blinks as though he's just been given permission to be human again. She pauses to roll her shoulders and sip from a clay flask of cool water. Sweat beads along her brow, glinting like molten gold, but her gaze remains sharp and clear. She looks oddly lighter here, stripped of jewels, her linen dress pinned back at the shoulders, her arms moving in clean arcs of muscle and focus. It's not the polished grandeur of the throne room. It's something raw, quieter. Then the guards bring out the moving targets. These are simple frames with straw discs mounted on swivels, dragged along ropes by 2 very nervous-looking attendants. They creak into motion, rolling unevenly across the range like drunk beetles. The queen watches them for a beat, eyes narrowing just slightly, then draws. The first arrow hits the spinning target dead on, sending the disc whirling like an outraged sun. The second lands a hair from the center. The third splits the edge of the first, the crack audible even from here. The guard's composure cracks like a dropped jar. 2 of them exchange the tiniest high five behind their shields. Historians still argue whether archery here was meant more as military training or as a symbolic gesture of kingship. Watching her now, you think it might be neither. This feels less like duty and more like meditation, a way to burn off the invisible static of power, to remember she's still just a body with breath and bones. After a final flurry of shots, she lowers the bow. The silence after the last arrow thuds into the target is almost theatrical, as if the world is pausing to admire her aim. Then she exhales slowly, sets the bow back on its rack and flexes her fingers. The tension in the air dissolves like sugar in warm tea. One of the guards, tall, square-jawed, and visibly fighting the urge to grin, bows and murmurs something about her form improving. The high queen arches an eyebrow so imperiously that he immediately begins studying the ground, as if it's just become the most riveting thing in the kingdom. As she turns to leave, a breeze stirs across the courtyard, lifting the loose strands of her hair. The arrows still quiver in the targets, their fletching whispering in the wind like gossip. You follow her out through the tall sandstone arch, the sound of her sandals soft on the dust. Behind you, the guards retrieve the arrows in reverent silence, as though plucking relics from an altar. The fading sun slants low across the practice yard, gilding every stray feather and nicked target, as if to mark them sacred. Late afternoon light pours through a high lattice, and turns the dust into glitter as you trail the queen toward the river wing, a suite of rooms that smells faintly of papyrus, pitch, and stories that begin with, "So there we were." The corridor widens into a chart room, and your first thought is that the walls have learned to breathe. Long reed maps hang from wooden pegs, their surfaces inked with looping blue lines, dotted cataracts and tiny drawings of fish that look suspiciously judgmental. Low tables are crowded with rope coils, bronze-sounding weights, and clay models of riverboats with prows carved like watchful birds. The queen steps inside, and every navigator in the room straightens as if a string has been pulled. They're sun-browned and lean, wrapped in travel-stained linen, and they move with that loose-hipped balance of people who measure distance in currents rather than steps. A master pilot bows and gestures to the largest map, smoothed across a cedar board, like an idea waiting to be proven. He starts speaking in the steady cadence of a man who has told the river what to do and been told politely to reconsider. He points with a reed pen, north toward the broad, easy water, south toward the broken spine of the Nile, those famous cataracts that turn navigation into a conversation with rocks. You can almost hear them in his voice. The first cataract where Egypt begins to rethink its confidence. The wild churning narrows farther south where boats must be unloaded and hauled overland. Mainstream fact time, because even your sleepy brain perks up. Kushite crews are known for running these cataracts with a mix of muscle and geometry, timing their hauls to the flood's rise. The kingdom's control of portages makes tolls tribute, and diplomacy flow the queen's way like obedient fish. Attendants unroll smaller charts, thin linen sheets inked with landmarks, lone sycamores, sandbars that look like sleeping hippos, shrines where offerings persuade the river to be in a good mood. One shows a string of depots, mud brick storehouses perched above floodline where grain, resin, and copper tools wait like patient camels for the next boat. Historians still argue whether these depots were coordinated by a central palace bureau or managed by local clans under royal oversight. The queen listens without comment, the corner of her mouth doing that imperceptible almost smile that says she likes it when scholars wrestle. The master pilot slides a tray forward, small clay tokens stamped with symbols, fish for dried catch, wave lines for water jars, a palm branch for dates. He explains how each token marks cargo allotments and crew rations. The queen lifts one between finger and thumb, weighing the promise embedded in baked clay, then sets it down with the soft click of destiny scheduling itself. A steward brings in a model of the flagship barge, its hull blackened with pitch, its deck dotted with little pegs where awnings would stretch. The prow bird's beak curves forward, ready to peck misfortune on the nose. The queen circles it, noting the steering oars, the lash points for towing ropes, the arrangement of amphorae lashed low to keep weight steady. She asks the sort of questions that make professionals sweat. How many hands to haul at the third cataract in a low flood? Which sandbar pretends to be trustworthy and then eats rudders? What song keeps the stroke even when the sun is rude? The pilot answers steadily, only once glancing at the ceiling, as if hoping a helpful cloud might offer its opinion. Quirky tidbit for your collection. A young helmsman holds up a gourd painted with big staring eyes. He says it's tied to the prow so the boat can see rocks before rocks see it. Another crewman displays a charm pouch stuffed with ostrich eggshell beads and a folded scrap of linen inked with a very tiny crocodile. He swears it keeps the real crocodiles in a good mood, which is where you would like crocodiles to stay. Far away in excellent spirits, reminiscing about salads. The queen gestures to a ledger. The scribe flips it open, revealing columns of neat symbols, jars of beer, sacks of barley, coils of rope measured by Cupid, spare rudder pins, because the river loves a snack, and a line item that simply reads cool shade, which turns out to be canvas awnings and not an attitude problem. She approves adjustments. A few more water skins per crew, extra pitch for hull seams, and a second crate of honey cakes to encourage optimism at inconvenient sandbars. Somewhere in the palace, a baker feels destiny tap him on the shoulder. They move to timing. The flood is falling into its gentle late-season mood, which means easier channels but trickier shoals. Water low enough to reveal new opinions. The pilot proposes setting out at dawn 2 days hence, hugging the eastern bank past the reed beds where ibis gossip, then crossing to the lee of the long red cliff where wind behaves itself. He sketches the path with the reed pen, a lazy zigzag that has nothing lazy about it. A guard captain ducks in to ask about escorts. Bandits prefer roads, but some prefer boats with rich opinions. The Queen considers and assigns a pair of light craft with archers. Their job is not to start fights, but to look like fights would be a poor hobby. She adds that archers should carry spare bowstrings wrapped in oiled linen. The desert likes to drink moisture from anything that matters. A chart of the southern reaches appears, littered with tiny ink hills, temples, and several hippos drawn with generous self-esteem. Here the debate thickens like syrup. Does the current split at the bend near the Black Rock promontory this season, or has the river shifted its mind? One elder navigator swears by a hidden back channel that saves hours and one nerve. A younger pilot insists last month's storm rearranged the sandbars, like bored gods redecorating. Historians still argue whether formal river schools taught standardized routes, or whether knowledge moved mouth to ear along family lines, and in this room, you can feel both. Textbooks made of breath, maps made of memory. The Queen ends it the way she ends most things, calmly. She orders a scout run at first light with a slim draft skiff. 2 rowers, 1 poleman, 1 scribe to draw what water says. No heroics. If the channel sulks, they come home and let the river have its nap. Logistics unfurl. Quartermasters read out crew lists. Names roll like oars. Sitaman of the steady hand, Jehut of the whistled signals, Nari who can smell a sandbar at dusk. The Queen nods to each roll as if blessing both skill and spine. She tells the cooks to soak barley for travel bread, to pack sesame cakes wrapped in palm leaf, and to set aside the better beer, the beeswax sealed jars that taste like a quiet thunderstorm. Someone notes the royal taste for tamarind. 2 extra jars go on the manifest with a caution that hippos do not respect flavor. A runner arrives with a small clay tablet. The wind on the river has turned cooperative, cooler by a whisper. The room brightens. You can feel morale tilt like a sail catching. The Queen marks a final note on the ledger with her signet, just a press into wax. But the room exhales as if gravity changed its mind. She adds one last instruction. Offerings for the little river shrines, lotus petals, a pinch of barley, a tiny cup of beer. Not because gods are vending machines, she murmurs, but because gratitude makes hands steadier. As the meeting dissolves into purposeful murmurs, a navigator shyly presents a gift, a small cedar box carved with waves. Inside lies a polished river pebble, banded black and gold, smooth as a thought you've carried for years. For luck, he says, then corrects himself, for remembering. The Queen turns it in her palm, the light sliding over its curve like water, deciding to be patient. She keeps it. When she leaves the chart room, twilight has begun combing cool fingers through the palace. Somewhere a peacock wonders aloud about life's meaning. From far off you catch the muffled thud of archers retrieving arrows, And nearer still, the soft clink of amphorae being lashed in tidy rows. The river waits outside the city like a black ribbon, unrolling itself toward night. You follow her through the colonnade, and you imagine the barges pushing off at dawn, prows painted with eyes, charms tucked under deck planks, crews humming the slow stroke song that makes oars agree with lungs. Behind you, the reed maps sway faintly in the draught as if nodding. Ahead, dinner fires begin to breathe, and somewhere a baker counts honey cakes with the seriousness of a general. The expedition is not yet on the water, but its wake is already rippling through the palace. Lists tightening, ropes coiling, hearts tilting toward the current. You feel it in your chest, the quiet, inevitable pull downstream, and the steadier pull of the woman who tells the river where her people need to go. By the time she turns back toward the heart of the palace, the sky has slouched into amber. Long shadows lean across the flagstones, and the breeze carries a faint, teasing hint of wood smoke. Somewhere a musician plucks a stray chord, a fragment of melody that drifts like a thought someone forgot to finish. The Kandake walks a little faster now, not hurrying, just matching the quiet urgency that always seems to hum through the palace in the hour before nightfall. This is the kitchen's hour, and the kitchens do not dawdle. The entrance is a wide arch, cut with lotus reliefs blackened faintly from years of cooking fires. Warm air rolls out as you step through, carrying a perfume so rich it nearly knocks the sandals off your feet. Sizzling duck fat, sweet beer mash, cinnamon, coriander, and the earthy scent of lentils stewing in clay pots the size of heroic bathtubs. The kitchen is cavernous, easily the size of a small village, and currently resembles one in the middle of a festival. Cooks swarm like purposeful ants clattering bronze ladles, shouting across open hearths and somehow never colliding. You watch one woman balance a stack of bread trays on her head, while scolding a junior for insufficient enthusiasm in the kneading of destiny. At the far wall, great brick ovens glow like tame volcanoes. Apprentices shovel out flatbreads with long-handled paddles, flipping them in practiced arcs that land with soft thuds on reed mats. The air above them shimmers, and your hairline starts to sweat in sympathy. Closer to the center, a row of bronze cauldrons bubble over low charcoal fires. One holds duck legs braising in date syrup, the surface popping with tiny golden blisters. Another simmers a thick millet porridge fragrant with honey and sesame. A boy in an apron 2 sizes too big frantically fans the fire with a palm frond, muttering that the porridge has opinions again. The queen moves through it all like a ship gliding through surf. The chaos parts around her. She pauses to watch a senior butcher, carving neat strips of goat meat for skewers, his knife flashing so fast it hums. He bows low as she passes, though not low enough to slow his hands. On a side table, confectioners are coaxing honey into glossy spirals that harden as they cool. One dips a fingertip in and twirls a thread of molten gold onto a fig. The smell makes your teeth want to file an application. Beside them, a brewer strains frothy beer through woven reed sieves into wide-mouthed jars, the liquid dark and smelling faintly of bread deciding to become music. A dramatic clatter erupts from a nearby prep bench as 2 rival sauce makers lunge for the same jar of coriander. It turns into a standoff, silent, intense, each holding a wooden spoon like a dueling sword. The queen pauses. One of them gulps audibly. She arches a single eyebrow, and they immediately agree, in perfect unison, to share. You suspect this solution will last approximately 6 seconds after she leaves. Historians still argue whether royal kitchens like this operated as permanent institutions or were assembled fresh for each banquet. Judging by the synchronized frenzy around you, it's clearly both. a standing army of culinary ambition that can spring into war footing at the sight of a shopping list. The menu is sprawling. Joe Steward rattles it off at the Queen's shoulder, like someone describing a small edible empire. Roasted ducks stuffed with figs and wild herbs, river fish grilled in lotus leaves, lentil stews thickened with crushed almonds, honey cakes layered with goat cheese, spiced melon chilled in earthenware jars, sunk in cool wells since morning. There's even talk of candied lotus roots, which sound like something designed to make dentists weep. The Queen says little, just nods occasionally, though her gaze sharpens when the steward mentions the beer allotment. She orders an extra jar for the poets, a phrase that carries the subtle energy of someone who has suffered sober poets before and does not intend to repeat the experience. You drift closer to the cold pantry alcove, its thick stone walls sweating faintly in the heat. Inside, baskets overflow with pomegranates, dates, and cucumbers still dewy from the palace gardens. A girl stands ankle-deep in a trough of crushed ice, singing to herself as she turns jars of cream so they churn evenly. The melody is off-key but warm, like the sun hums when no one's looking. Nearby, a team of knife-wielding vegetable carvers transforms carrots into lotus blossoms and cucumbers into coiled serpents. One sculptor proudly displays a crocodile made from a single massive radish. It looks alarmingly plausible. The Queen inspects it with solemn gravity, then gives the tiniest nod, which nearly makes the carver faint directly into the soup. The heat grows thicker, the smells richer. Firelight gilds the copper pots, flashing off every stirring arm and sweating brow. The kitchen feels like the inside of a great beast, hot, loud, endlessly busy, yet also choreographed. Every movement part of a quiet ritual older than the walls. Quirky little note. One old cook keeps a lucky pebble in his apron pocket and taps it 3 times before tasting each dish. He claims it warns him of mediocre seasoning. You watch him do it, see him scowl, and then witness him add an aggressive pinch of cumin to an already ferocious stew. The pebble must have strong opinions. At the far end, a line of servers are practicing the procession, lifting massive platters, pivoting gracefully, stepping in perfect time. It's like watching choreography performed by furniture with ambitions. The steward clicks his tongue whenever anyone wobbles. One poor man trips over his own sandals, somehow keeps the platter level, and then bows so deeply he essentially erases the mistake through sheer commitment. Finally, the Queen signals to the head chef, a mountain of a man with a scar shaped like a question mark on his cheek. He bows until his tall hat wobbles like a nervous heron. She gives 3 crisp instructions: less salt on the duck, more cinnamon in the melon syrup, and do not frighten the melon carver this time. The chef accepts this like a divine decree, slaps his chest in salute, and bellows at the nearest apprentice to adjust everything yesterday. And then she turns to go. The kitchens ripple in her wake, voices rising, knives flashing, fires roaring higher, as though her presence just wound the entire place like a clock. You follow her back into the cooler corridors, the cacophony muffling behind stone. The smell of roast duck and honey clings to you like a flattering rumor. Somewhere ahead, the grand banquet hall is already waking, polishing its pillars and arranging its shadows. Behind you, the kitchen roars on, forging feast from chaos, as if the sun has been convinced to arrive at the table wrapped in cinnamon and applause. The corridor widens and brightens as you follow the Kandake into the grand banquet hall, the clamor of the kitchens fading behind you like a distant tide. The air here is cooler, touched with the faint mineral chill of polished stone, and it smells of oil lamps, beeswax, and that faint, dry, sweet scent that always clings to gold. The space opens suddenly, vast and echoing, and for a heartbeat you forget to breathe. The hall is immense, long enough that sound takes its time crossing it, tall enough that the roof seems to hover somewhere in its own weather. Slender sandstone columns march in parallel rows down the length of the chamber, their capitals flaring like stone papyrus blooms. Between them hang enormous linen banners dyed deep crimson and edged in gold thread, gently swaying in the faint current stirred by servants moving like ghosts. The floors are inlaid with geometric mosaics, swirls of turquoise, ivory and obsidian pieced together into patterns so intricate they seem to shift when you blink. Bronze braziers shaped like lotus blossoms burn low along the walls, their flames painting the stone in soft flickers. Light glints from hammered gold reliefs, showing scenes of victory. Rows of Kushite archers, processions of elephants, stylized rivers bending like tame serpents. Down the center of the hall stretches the banquet table, a colossal plank of polished acacia, wide as a small boat and twice as long. Cushioned couches line either side, draped with embroidered textiles in peacock hues. Servants are arraying the first wave of dishes, bowls of spiced lentils, trays of grilled river fish wrapped in lotus leaves, plates of honey-drizzled figs that glow like amber beads. At the far end, beneath a towering mural of winged Amun spreading his arms over a golden sun disk, stands the Queen's dais. It is lower than a throne's platform, yet somehow feels higher, as though the air itself rearranges to honor her. A wide-backed chair of ebony carved with lions waits there, its seat draped in leopard hide. The guests begin to arrive in murmuring clusters. Nobles, generals, priests, foreign envoys lingering from the day's audience. Their sandals whisper over the mosaics. Gold necklaces clink softly. The air fills with the faint perfume of myrrh, coriander oil, and well-rehearsed confidence. Musicians settle along the side of the hall, harpists tuning delicate bird-shaped lyres, drummers tightening hide straps, flutists warming up with shy trills. The first notes float out as the Queen enters, and the hall seems to lean toward her. Her gown tonight is different, richer than the day's crisp linen, dyed deep indigo that drinks the light, belted with a wide gold girdle chased with tiny lotus petals. The cobras on her crown catch the firelight like twin flashes of controlled lightning. Everyone bows, the movement rippling outward like a sigh of wind through tall grass. She steps onto the dais and seats herself with quiet precision. A herald strikes the floor with his staff. The banquet begins. The first course arrives in a graceful parade of servants, platters of roasted duck lacquered with date syrup until their skins gleam like mahogany. Pyramids of pomegranate seeds heaped in shallow bronze bowls, barley cake sprinkled with sesame. The scent of warm spice and fruit hangs heavy in the air, as thick as a lullaby. She eats little, slowly, selecting a slice of duck, a spoonful of lentils, a single pomegranate seed placed delicately on her tongue like an edible gem. Around her, conversation begins to uncoil. Priests murmur about omens seen in ibis flights. A general boasts softly about new spear drills and how none of his soldiers have fainted. In the last fortnight, which is a personal record, a poet is reciting a new ode to her reign and doing, with such extravagant metaphors comparing her to the sun's secret twin and the reason crocodiles bother waking up, that even the musicians glance up, trying not to laugh. The Queen listens without visible reaction, though you notice her fingers tap once against her goblet at the crocodile line. One of the guards standing behind her coughs into his fist in a way that suspiciously sounds like smothered laughter. The musicians shift into a steadier rhythm, soft lyre chords, slow drum beats like padded heartbeats. the low breathy keen of a flute weaving between them. The sound settles over the room like velvet. Servants refill cups with dark malty beer from beeswax-sealed jars. The froth smells faintly of warm bread and star anise. Historians still argue whether these royal banquets were political tools disguised as entertainment or entertainment disguised as political tools. Watching the hall now, you suspect the distinction is moot. Power flows here like the beer, disguised as leisure but steady, constant, intoxicating. A new course arrives. Grilled tilapia laid on beds of wilted greens, drizzled with honey coriander sauce, followed by skewers of spiced goat meat and trays of melon chilled in stone jars buried in cool sand since dawn. The scent is lush, dizzying. You are briefly certain you could pledge undying loyalty to whoever hands you one of those skewers. The poet, still mid-performance, hits a particularly ambitious stanza about how her voice tames the lightning and persuades it to braid her hair. The queen calmly sips her beer. Someone at the lower tables chokes on a lentil. As the meal drifts on, the tone softens. Conversations slip into laughter. The air grows hazier with the mingled warmth of braziers and full stomachs. Someone starts clapping softly in time with the drums, and soon the rhythm becomes the pulse of the room. The queen leans back against her carved chair, her profile caught in the lamplight. She looks both impossibly distant and wholly present, an island in a warm, noisy sea. She breaks a honey cake in half, offers one piece to the guard at her shoulder without looking. He freezes, then takes it with the gravity of receiving a divine prophecy, and eats it very slowly as if speed might cause him to explode. Plates are cleared. New dishes arrive. The hall breathes and swells and drifts on its own current, and you feel yourself floating too, light with food and music and the strange serenity of watching an empire's heartbeat disguised as dinner. The banquet's warmth fades into a softer hum as the evening tilts toward ceremony. Servants glide through the hall collecting cups and laughter, and a herald appears at the dais, head bowed, voice low. The temple procession is ready. The rises, the gold of her girdle catching the lamplight like a small, well-behaved sunrise. You stand too, feeling the room's mood pivot, away from full plates and gentle jokes, toward something older that lives in the marrow of the city. Outside, the night is deep and tender. Stars have sprinkled themselves lavishly across the sky, and a crescent moon hangs just above the palace roofs like a slice of polished shell. The air is cooler now, cooled enough that the stone under your feet feels a little like memory. Waiting along the colonnade are torchbearers in 2 long lines, their flames cupped in bronze baskets. When they inhale, the torches respond, breathing with them. When they step forward, fire follows, obedient as a well-trained peacock, which is to say showy and prone to opinions, but surprisingly cooperative tonight. The queen steps into the first corridor of flame. Torches throw honey-colored light up the fluted columns, and waves of brightness move ahead of her like ripples. Your jewelry, okay. The borrowed bit they let you wear without asking too many questions catches the light. So does hers, the cobra diadem answering every flicker with a flash like a thought crossing a god's face. Musicians fall in behind. A slow drum, a pair of soft flutes, 3 small harps carrying a melody that feels like walking in time with your own heartbeat. The procession moves from the palace into the temple precinct. The threshold is marked by ram-headed sphinxes crouched in pairs along the avenue. Their sandstone bodies look almost warm, and for a second you imagine one will yawn, stretch, and ask if the goose from the morning offering ever got a union break. The priests and priestesses meet the queen here, stepping into the torchlight with faces dusted in ochre and eyes rimmed heavy with kohl. One carries a ceremonial sistrum. Its bronze rings jingle as she tilts it. a delicate shimmer of sound like sand whispered across glass. Beyond the Sphinx Avenue, the temple pylons rise, massive inward slanting walls with banners that droop and lift in the night breeze. Reliefs along their faces come alive in the fluttering light. The queen stands taller than captives, taller than rivers, taller than the fig trees that, in daylight, would throw real shade. You pass through the gate, and the world hushes as if a great ear just leaned down to listen. Inside the first court, the procession settles into its pattern. Torchbearers walk the perimeter, harps sigh. A censer drifts ahead, spilling frankincense that curls around your ankles and climbs your clothes. A priest sings the opening hymn, in a voice so still and steady the torches seem to lean closer. The words are older than this temple, older than this city. Names of Amun the hidden, Amun the wind in the reeds, Amun who hears what's thought before it becomes a sound. Mainstream fact whispering through the stone, the cult of Amun moved south with power. Flourishing in Kush as Meroe rose, temples here took the familiar Egyptian forms but wore local hands. Local sandstone, local sky. The queen lifts her hands, palms upward, and the hymn opens like a door. Everyone answers in low chorus. Attendants, guards, even you, mumbling syllables the way you hum along to a favorite song you've only ever half heard. The sound doesn't crowd the air, it threads it. A braided line of breath strong enough to pull your thoughts into a slower gear. You feel your steps fall into the same rhythm as the drum, as the torches, as the linked shadows of papyrus capitals gliding across the walls. Historians still argue whether these nocturnal processions marked precise lunar observances, or if palace schedules nudged the calendar when dinner ran long. Either way, the ritual tonight feels perfectly timed, as if the moon signed off on the itinerary. You pass through another gate into the hypostyle hall, where columns rise like stone marshes, bundled papyrus stalks carved upward into a ceiling of painted stars. The torchlight flickers, and the gold paint in those stars answers faintly, like a night sky practicing its lines. A priestess steps forward with a tray, small alabaster cups of beer and pinch bowls of barley. The queen takes one of each and places them on a waist-high table along with lotus flowers laid earlier. The sistrum rings again. Someone behind you stifles a sneeze, and the echo ricochets through the columns like a mouse wearing tap shoes. The queen doesn't react, which is probably why the sneezer survives. In the sanctuary court, attendants draw back linen hangings, and the shrine appears, a carved naos housing the god's cult statue. You never see it fully. The priests keep their bodies angled just so, guarding a modesty as old as stone. But you glimpse enough. Ram horns curving around a crown, inlaid eyes bright as wet leaves. The queen steps close, and the room seems to fold tighter around the axis of her breath. She sets the offerings down, touches the altar with 2 fingers, and bows her head. Not long, not low, but deeply still. The torchlight makes the gold on her collar glow, as if it's remembering the sun. A poet, the same one who earlier claimed her voice braids lightning, has been given a short verse to recite here. He begins with admirable restraint, comparing her reign to steady floodwaters and well-tempered winds. He almost makes it a whole stanza, before slipping in a line about hippos nodding respectfully when they hear her footsteps. You consider that progress. The queen's expression remains a lake. The musicians change mode. Harps switch to a minor drift that seems to lengthen your spine. A low drum enters only on every 3rd breath, giving the night a subtle tilt. The priest intones petitions for the city. Strong boat timbers, obedient winds. Granaries that sigh with weight. Healthy children who remember to wash before ceremonies. He places a tiny gilded ram on the altar, the size of your palm. horns spiraling like shells. Quirky tidbit. A junior priest whispers that this particular ram has been replaced twice because someone keeps accidentally polishing its nose clean off. You picture a tiny naked-nosed statue and nearly snort incense. From the rear of the sanctuary, a breeze sneaks in, cool and edged with river smell. The torches bow a little. Shadows lean over the floor like long sleepy cats. The queen begins the closing hymn herself, voice low as a well. Syllables poured carefully one after another, so even the stone seems to drink slower. Around you everyone joins, softer still, and the sound becomes less music than weather. Warm air moving through reed beds, whisper touching water. Historians still argue whether the queen in these rites acted as high priestess by right or merely as royal presence, while clergy did the metaphysical heavy lifting. Watching the choreography now, the way priests orbit her stance, the way the hymn anchors itself to her breath, you suspect titles matter less than gravity. She is the fixed point. Everything else leans the final act, a blessing for the road and the river. A small chest of offerings is brought forward, folded linen, a handful of barley, 2 lengths of oiled bowstring somewhere. Thanarcha just felt seen, a jar sealed with beeswax, and a tiny pebble polished by hands, perhaps a twin to the river stone tucked in her palm earlier. She touches the chest lightly, sealing the promise that crews will carry it to the shrines along tomorrow's route. Gratitude for passage granted. Gratitude in advance for passage asked. When the hymn closes, silence steps in, not empty but full, the way a cup is full before anyone remembers to drink. The priests bow, withdrawing with measured grace. The torchbearers pivot, and the fire river that led you in now unrolls back toward the world. As the procession reverses, you catch the faintest scent of rain that is not there. Maybe frankincense deciding to be weather, maybe memory flexing old muscles. You file out past the ram-headed sphinxes, their faces glowing like warm bread under the torchlight. The night beyond the pylons looks wider now, as if the ceremony scrubbed it clean. Stars hang a little lower. The moon nudges higher like a boat nosing upstream. The palace roofs gleam ahead, and somewhere on the far side of the walls a peacock remembers it has feelings about cosmology and announces them. Back in the colonnade, torches gutter as attendants cap them. Darkness returns by degrees, gentle and deliberate. The queen pauses at the threshold and releases a breath you didn't realize you were sharing with her. For a heartbeat, the night holds still around that exhale. Then she moves on, and the city seems to move with her, lighter, steadier, as if the hymn planted soft weights in everyone's pockets to keep their dreams from blowing away. You trail after her through the sleeping palace, footsteps muted by reed mats, the incense threading your clothes. Somewhere a watchman taps his staff in a slow pattern, the palace's heartbeat at night. The crocodile on the temple altar, smug tail crack and all, will keep its own watch till dawn. And you, humming the ghost of the hymn under your breath, follow the gold flicker of the queen's crown as it rounds a final corner and vanishes into quieter shadow. The palace feels hollowed out now, emptied of noise and steam and the day's hard edges. The torches are fewer, their flames steady and small, so the corridors glow like amber veins inside a sleeping beast. You follow the Kandake through the quiet, her pace slowed to something close to strolling, not quite tired, but wrapped in the kind of stillness that only arrives when every task has been gently tucked into place. The scent of old parchment greets you before the doorway appears. Dry, powdery with a faint sweetness like cracked cedar, she is heading to the royal archives. The chamber is circular and cool, a hidden well of silence. Light from a single bronze lamp flickers across towering cedar shelves, stacked with scrolls, reed baskets, and wooden tablets tied in bundles. The walls are painted with faded murals of scribes bent at their work, and overhead a painted vulture goddess spreads her wings, her face serene in the half-dark. Here time thickens. The attendants stay at the threshold while she moves inward alone. Her bracelets make soft occasional chimes that sound like memory deciding to hum. You follow at a distance, careful as breath. Scrolls lie on low stone tables in loose rows, their ends capped in carved ivory. A scribe sits cross-legged near the far wall, rubbing oil into a cracked parchment. His motions small and reverent, as if soothing an old friend back into shape. He bows silently and vanishes into the shadows like a thought you'll remember later. The queen lifts one scroll, rolls it open across the table. Faded black ink curls down its length in dense, neat rows, lines of Meroitic script as steady as marching feet. Historians still argue about how fully this script has been deciphered even now. To you it looks like a river of looping reeds frozen mid-dance. She reads silently, lips still. The lamp's glow shivers on the gold bands around her wrists, on the faint sheen of sweat dried at her temples. A soft breeze slinks in through the high lattice, stirring dust that sparkles like tired stars. She pauses, looks up at the shelves stretching away, and for a moment her eyes blur, not with fatigue but with distance, as if she's seeing not paper but people. Long-vanished kings whose names linger here, the architects of aqueducts whose bones feed gardens now, the generations of grain talliers and goose counters who ink themselves into permanence. She unrolls another scroll. This one crackles softly, older, smelling faintly of beeswax and river mud. It's a trade record, names of ships, crates of copper ingots, jars of sesame oil tallied in columns, and oddly, an entire row for miscellaneous wonders. You picture a scribe shrugging over something incomprehensible, a singing fish, a three-headed radish, and deciding that wonder will do. The queen traces a finger down the page like she's petting the past. In the center of the room stands a bronze globe, hollow and etched with constellations. A thin bronze pointer spears upward from its axis, aimed at nowhere in particular. She stops before it, resting one palm on its cool shell. Her eyes half close. You can't tell if she's thinking about the stars above the city right now, or about the ancient hands that hammered these patterns into metal. Either way, her breath goes deep and slow, the sound of someone quietly refueling her soul. On a side shelf, a set of wooden tablets lies neatly stacked. One is different, dark ebony instead of pale sycamore, carved with a border of lotus petals. She lifts it. The script etched into it is neater than anything else here, each character sharp enough to nick silence. She studies it for a long moment, unmoving, the way you look at something that once hurt and still matters. Then she crosses to a recessed alcove at the back of the chamber. It's lined with niches holding the oldest records, stone stelae carved with deep, straight grooves. Their shadows are heavy. She stands there quietly, not reading, just absorbing, as if letting their weight press against her until her own feels measured by comparison. Quirky little note. A fat brown moth flutters from somewhere in the high shadows and lands on her shoulder, its wings patterned like crumbling maps. She glances at it, faintly amused, and does not brush it away. The moth stays, a tiny archivist who forgot to retire. Historians still argue whether rulers in Kush routinely visited archives like this or left the task to scribes. Watching her now, you can see why she comes. It's not about information. It's about anchoring. Each scroll is a thread stretching back through centuries of dust and sunlight and stubbornness, reminding her that even the greatest lives eventually turn into careful handwriting. Finally, she sits on a low-carved stool and opens a slim clay tablet case. Inside lie thin sheets of beaten gold inscribed with fine Meroitic characters. They glimmer like trapped sunset. She reads them slowly, her lips barely moving, eyes soft and very far away. Maybe it's a genealogy. Maybe a love poem someone risked their life to sneak in here. Maybe just inventory of ancient goats who have long since joined the sky. Whatever it is, it pulls her inward until she looks less like a queen and more like a person who's just remembered who she used to be. She exhales, gently rolls the gold sheets back into their case, sets them down with the kind of care you usually reserve for something alive. Then she stands, the moth still riding her shoulder like a tiny ghost of applause. She walks out, her shadow gliding over the stone floor like spilled ink, and the archives seem to sigh as the door closes behind her. You follow, blinking as the warm corridor light reclaims you. Behind that cedar door, the air is still heavy with dust and stories, quietly waiting for her to return. Ahead, the palace has gone nearly silent, as if it's holding its breath for her final act of the night. The hush grows even thicker as you trail the Kandake down the last corridor of the day. A long passage that bends gently, as if trying not to disturb itself. The lamps here burn low, just enough to paint soft halos on the sandstone. Every sound is padded. The brush of her linen hem, the whisper of your own steps, until even your heartbeat feels like an uninvited guest. A pair of guards stand at the far end before a pair of tall wooden doors inlaid with gold lotus petals. They bow as she approaches, then step aside. The doors open without creak or ceremony, as though they've learned to move only for her. Cool perfumed air drifts out, and you follow her into the royal bedchamber. The room is vast but feels strangely small because of how gently it's lit. Low bronze lamps glow behind carved screens, their light filtered into soft honey pools across the polished floor. Thick, woven rugs hush your steps. The air carries the faint sweetness of myrrh and something else. Blue lotus, maybe. That soft water scent that always seems to hover around her skin. Silk curtains hang from the ceiling around the bed, billowing slightly in the night breeze from a high latticed window. The bed itself is carved from ebony, its legs shaped like crouching lions, its frame draped in embroidered linen and topped with a heap of pillows the color of ripe figs. Beside it sits a low table holding a bronze mirror, a slender alabaster jar of perfumed oil, and a bowl of pomegranates glowing in the lamplight like tiny captured sunsets. Her attendants wait here in silence. They begin moving the moment she lifts her arms. They remove her gold girdle, her cuffs, her cobra crown, each piece set on the table in reverent order like verses of a poem. The jewelry loses its fire once it leaves her skin, cooling into quiet metal again. Without it, she looks lighter, though not smaller. The way a drawn bow looks softer once the string is loose. They undo the pins in her braids, combing her hair with long ivory teeth dipped in scented oil. The strands fall dark and heavy over her shoulders. You catch the faint crackle of static from the day slipping out of her. A servant kneels to wash her feet in a shallow copper basin, the water rippling amber in the lamplight. The queen closes her eyes briefly, the hint of a sigh passing through her like wind through silk. Historians still argue whether such nightly rituals were purely about hygiene or intended as symbolic renewals of divine favor. Watching now, you think it's both and something more, the simple, radical act of setting down the world for a few minutes and letting someone else carry it. She drinks from a small cup of cool tamarind juice, then dismisses the attendants with a gesture. They retreat backwards, heads bowed, and vanish through a side door, leaving the chamber wrapped in near silence. The only sound now is the soft clack of a date seed as she sets it back into its bowl. She moves to the bed, parts the silk curtains with slow hands, and settles among the pillows. The linen sighs under her weight. Outside, the breeze stirs the curtains again, carrying the faint murmur of the Nile beyond the city, a low, distant purr like some great old god asleep under the stars. She lies back, arms loose, eyes half-lidded. The moonlight pools on her face, painting her in silver. For a moment you see the entire day folded inside her. The incense and grain dust, the honey glaze and elephant musk, the glitter of lapis, the scratch of papyrus, the quiet thunder of decisions stacking neatly in her mind, all of it packed away behind her breathing. Her eyelids close fully. The slow rhythm of her breath settles into the same tempo as the rustling curtains. A peacock cries somewhere far away, a single note of unresolved mystery, and is immediately ignored by the universe. You stand in the doorway a moment longer, reluctant to disturb the fragile hush. The air feels thick, almost syrupy with calm. The lions carved on the bed's legs seem drowsy now, their eternal vigilance softened by sleep's perimeter. Then you step back, letting the door ease shut without a sound. The palace exhales. The corridors outside are almost dark, the lamps turned down to embers. The hush spreads outward from the bedchamber, like ripples from a stone dropped into still water. You walk slowly, letting your steps melt into the reed mats until the palace itself seems to forget you're there. Outside, the night stretches wide and blue-black, stitched with stars. The city murmurs faintly in the distance, an occasional bark, the scrape of a boat pole on stone, someone laughing far off like they've just remembered a good story. The breeze off the river slides through the colonnades, soft and cool, smelling of water and dust and distant tamarisk flowers. The day has folded itself away and the queen sleeps, crown set aside, breath steady as the earth's. Tomorrow will build itself around her again like stone around a seed. But for now the world is still, waiting, peaceful. Let your shoulders unclench. Let your jaw slacken. Let your thoughts stop pacing and lie down. Sleep is here.